Hello, and welcome to episode 25 of the 6 Pixels Under podcast. I am nerdSlayer, your host. Why does it look a little bit darker in that angle? Oh, that's because my light got turned around. Second. I have long arms. We're doing it live. We're doing it live. All right? Doing it live. As I said, welcome to episode 25 of the 6 Pixels Under podcast. On this week's podcast, we're going to talk about our Star Trek Online Death of a Game recap. As I mentioned, every Death of a Game will have a post recap that happens on the following podcast episode. We will also talk about Halo Master Chief Collection possibly coming to PC and news of that possibly coming tomorrow. And we will, more so this episode, talk more about MMOs. And frankly speaking, I didn't have a lot of current news topics that I was really interested in today, or really for this week. So I think I'll have maybe a longer call-in segment. That way I can chat with you guys more towards the end. Yeah, so that explains it. Song just finished playing and you've started the show. Anyway, what is up, everybody? Welcome to this 11th of March 2019. Maybe you're at work, maybe you're at home, maybe you're having a good time. Maybe you figured out that the next Death of a Game is Secret World. I know that has some people excited. Certainly has me excited because it's a game that I have a personal history with, and it's one that I frankly have a lot of good things to say about, which it always makes those are the most unfortunate stories. The most unfortunate stories are the ones that you're like, man, I wanted so much from that. Changing my... Okay, so before I go into some of the current news that I have, which is not a whole lot this week, unless you guys can find some more interesting stories, I don't believe Card is here today, so don't be bothering him. Instead, if you have any questions, save them for me at the end of the podcast, where you can @ me in Twitch chat, and I will answer your questions. So the first thing I wanted to get to, of course, is going to be the Star Trek video that I recently put out. I figured I'd go ahead and do this first. Last time I did the Dirty Bomb one at the end, and it seemed like a couple of people missed it because, you know, they don't watch it until all the way to the end. So now I'll do it in the beginning. And what? Okay, Onbu's here. You can @ Onbu. And you can also @ Ludens. You don't have to just @ me, I should say that. I don't want all of Europe to riot against me. Okay. Let's talk about this week's video. Star Trek Online. Now this is probably Limboss's most favorite part. But this is the part where we try to get through the comments and sort through the chaff. Huh. It's always weird, like, I'll have random shit like this pop up on my spam, and I'm not quite sure why. Are people reporting this guy for spam? Is that how this works? Because I've always been weirded out by that. This guy's literally saying a fact, and it's coming up as spam. Like, I hear the X-Files music playing in the background. It's pretty creepy. Back up. Let's just look at the top comments. All right. So here's a good one. The thing I want to first talk about is just kind of my overall view and kind of goal with the video. That'd probably be a good place to start. So with the Star Trek video, the Star Trek video honestly kind of came to me randomly because I was planning on doing the Secret World video before that, and then I wanted to do either like either Asheron's Call or something like that. But I wanted to do another MMO, but then I thought to myself, you know what? Like, I covered Star Wars already in great detail, and I haven't really covered Star Trek nor Lord of the Rings, And at this current moment, Star Trek Online is in a clear spot where you can see it as an obvious like entity. It still exists. It's still around. You know, the game itself, not the franchise. The game is still around. It still has what I would call a healthy enough player base to sustain at least one major content update a year, which is good enough for those who are loyal to the franchise. You look at the numbers on Steam, and they're in like the 1,500 to 2,000 number of concurrent players, which, I mean, for that kind of game that didn't necessarily have the biggest response at launch, that it's pretty impressive. And so the idea for doing a Star Trek video was that, clearly speaking, Star Trek Online did not have the same impact that Star Wars Galaxies had. And they came out not completely out of the same realm of timeline. Like they came out within like a 7-year period, 6 to 7 year period. And if you compare Star Trek, obviously, to Star Wars The Old Republic now, that's even more apparent that they're similar in that they're both story focused. They both have crappy combat. They both have very, prominent sci-fi IPs rather, and rely sort of on the packaging and the marketing, I would say, in order to attract a player base. So what attracted me to Star Trek was that, first off, Star Trek is not my favorite series in the world, but it's one that I was always interested in simply because it was one that was different that I had experienced. I was a Star Wars fanboy growing up, and still am in large part. And I didn't get into Star Trek until later in life. But Star Trek, of course, has a central theme that's probably one of the most interesting and unexplored themes in MMOs, period. And that's the idea of exploration. Exploration is just not really tackled all that often. And it's not tackled simply because it's very difficult to do. It's difficult to do right. And then most importantly, if you're not going to have a submodel, it's kind of difficult to monetize it. Because when it comes to story content, you can clearly just sell modules, you can sell campaigns, and you can sell them in expansions. And many, many, many different MMOs do that. But how many MMOs just unlock content for you that's like explorative? It's like, it's not easy to scale that amount of content, etc. So there's a lot of problems that go with trying to focus on that kind of content. So naturally, when I went into Star Trek Online way back when and saw the reviews and tried to do my research on it, the thing that I remember back then, and this is, you're talking, back when the game launched, so now like 7 to 9 years ago, the number one complaint you saw was the complaint about the ground combat, was that the game was incredibly instanced and that it was buggy. And that was kind of what everyone would talk about back then when I was playing MMOs, super heavily. And Star Trek Online was kind of always referred to as that game. Now, coming back, in 2019 to look at the game, what I've realized about it in particular that's been interesting to me is that it's relatively had kind of the same concurrent player base, and it's been putting out the same kind of content. So that's just super interesting to me, because it shows you that those particular players don't have as like stringent of expectations when it comes to whatever the Star Trek franchise means. Because when I look at the title, even just from afar, before I actually dove into it and started investigating it, I was surprised that people would like a Star Trek game that was heavily instanced. It just seemed like a misnomer or like an oxymoron to me. It's like, instance Star Trek? Like, I couldn't imagine it. In Star Wars Galaxies, the instances, if you will, were porting into a city, porting onto a planet, going into space, and then going into another space. There was like a loading zone. So technically it was instance, but it didn't necessarily feel like it, especially because whenever you would travel to other planets, if you took a shuttle, it was automated, and so it looked like as if you were traveling and not just loading, right? And then same thing, if you loaded your own ship, you'd load into a loading screen, but boom, you'd be the one flying your ship. You could fly to another station or to another planet if you wanted to. So these are all things that had me interested in the story of Star Trek Online in particular. And obviously, I've already covered sort of why I believe it to be what I would describe as dead in this context. And the simple point is this, for those who didn't see the video. My thoughts on Star Trek Online are simple enough in the sense that if the game died today or died in 6 years, would there be an emulator 16 years later of people still playing Star Trek Online? There would not. There wouldn't be one in 10 years. There wouldn't be one in 5 years. There likely won't really be an emulator. And not just because Perfect World Entertainment is involved, but because the game itself is just not that good. I haven't seen a whole lot of good arguments that say that Star Trek Online is a great game. I've seen arguments that it's good. It's good enough, basically, is the primary argument that people make. My point being is that when you look at what's called market share, right? Let's look up the simplest definition of market share. Market share is the portion of a market controlled by a particular company or a product. Simple enough. And so obviously it's a lot more complex than just that definition. Market share is something where you think of it as basically your influence on the market. Typically the amount of market percentage that you own shows how much input or how much effect you have on your given market. Now, certain markets are obviously very competitive, and so they're not going to have like one field or one company just completely dominates a market. Like, for example, when you look at Band-Aids, the Band-Aids genre, or like baby oil, these are dominated by like John & Johnson. These are dominated by like Procter & Gamble. Like, these are dominated by very specific companies who kind of make everything. So markets like that are completely dominated by one particular entity. Gaming, obviously, there's a lot of different games. There's a lot of different developers and a lot of different publishers. And so generally speaking, when it comes to a game, one particular company doesn't own such a large percentage of the market. However, it's different in the case of MMOs. In fact, right now, it is very much that way. There's a lot of dominant market shares. For example, WoW has an obviously dominant market share that's been dwindling, but certainly a very strong market share where they have to own at least upwards of 25% of the market. It has to be that case. I mean, there's just way too much of an impact current, but also past when it comes to WoW. I would wager that they own easily over. I mean, I would even say a third. You could say as far as a third. My point being is, like, you can look at other MMOs such as Final Fantasy in 11 and 14. Both have impacts in the market. Both have higher market shares, right? You look at a game like Star Trek Online and you think, what influence does it have in the marketplace? I mean, what is it impacting exactly? In what way is it innovative? It's basically a worse SWTOR. It has a better flying system, right? But the combat's worse. The story doesn't look any more in depth, right? You don't necessarily get more options or abilities to customize your character. And so what does Star Trek Online really offer that's unique? And you might be asking, why does it matter to be unique? The games that are currently out right now aren't really unique. Well, yeah, but they're also the biggest IPs, biggest publishers. They got the most money. They have the most money to make it work. Whereas Cryptic Studios, in this case, does not have a lot of money. They can't force the effort when it comes to Star Trek Online. They really never could. And so the idea is that they clearly never had a significant impact on their market, and they don't continue to have an impact on their market. They're exactly what you call a fringe title. And a fringe title who's essentially supported by its whales. And that seems to be something that's hotly debated even amongst Star Trek fans. If we get into kind of some of like the points that you see people mention here, oftentimes you'll see people make a point, something along the lines of, well, they basically want to sell you a bunch of loot boxes, or lock boxes they call them, and they want to keep selling you on more and more ships. They're not really interested in having a pay model, like a sub fee, because after Perfect World Entertainment acquired them, they realized by jacking up the prices and increasing the amount of monetization on ships and skins and captains and all that different stuff, you can, infinitely increase the money in regards to your revenue in comparison. I mean, it's just like, it's night and day. You go from having a $15 ceiling to having like multiple $100 ceiling. And the interesting thing is, I actually got a very interesting message. Sorry, I don't want to show the guy on screen, but I'll tell you exactly what he told me. I know somebody in particular who, this guy's very much involved in the Star Trek Online scene, and he showed me some very interesting statistics in regards to kind of how the prices of the ships work. So I'll go ahead and show that now. This is a point that I didn't make in the video that I wish I really would have hammered more into, is more specific on the level of pricing. I mentioned that one of the ships were purchasable for $30, but there's ships that cost even more than that, and people here did the price. They have the EC price, right? The keys required to get the EC, the Zen value, which is like the currency, I believe, and then you have the actual cost of it in dollars. And so for a lockbox ship, you could spend as much as $112 on average, or you could, for a promotional ship, spend as much as $295 on it. So like the idea here is that I greatly under exaggerated, underrepresented the amount of microtransactions that were inserted into the game, which is you know, it's not necessarily like a knock into myself. It's more of like, it's a point that I made that I could have expounded on better and showed a little bit more data, because when there's data available, that's when you really want to hammer home with data. Because I mean, let's just jump into that particular point. Data itself in the realm of MMOs is incredibly difficult to work with. And what I mean by that is that data in most markets, it operates a little bit differently, right? When you think about a certain, like, so in the MMO market, an MMO company basically doesn't have any reason to ever tell you what their population data is. The only reason they ever have is if it's really good. So if an MMO is doing really good, they'll be like, yeah, we have 1 million current players, 1 million subs, we're doing fantastic, guys. But as soon as that game starts doing badly, they're like, oh, we're not going to free to play because we're failing. So first, let's get that out of the way. We're just going free to play and everything's great. And you're just like, well, I don't know if like that makes sense. Like, I don't think you just change your entire business model if you're not, you know, struggling in some way. But the point being is that they're not incentivized. Companies or publishers are not incentivized to ever release statistical data. And I mean in regards to how much players spend, in regards to how much players play, how many players are playing. The only exception is the first, the whole money aspect. You'll see that in publicly traded companies like NCSoft. You'll see that Nexon, EA, obviously, some of these other companies like that. You can see that they're affected because they're publicly traded companies. So it's a little bit different in that case. Now, I bring this up particularly right now because I was talking about how when there's data, you should always showcase the data, right? Because it's essentially the best data that you have. There was a lot of arguments that kind of I found interesting, and I want to walk you guys through them. So one in particular comes from, and by the way, he's one of many who've made this argument, but I'll go ahead and read it here. Zarek Zakaron says that viewing the Steam charts is a common mistake made by folks with games like Warframe, Realm of the Mad God, Neverwinter, and countless other games, including but not limited to Star Trek Online. These games can be launched outside of Steam and given the option to run DRM all the time, Steam or not. Most people will choose not. When games have their own launchers, you have to run Steam to run the launcher to run the game. Most people will, again, choose to cut out the steps, etc., etc. So now, this is an interesting point that, first off, he makes it as astute as probably anybody does, because any of the other versions of that argument are actually worse because they don't add the caveat like he does, for example, like at the end saying that you can use it, but it's a guess at best is what he says. Now, I'm going to show you the flaw in this argument, and I will continue to show you the flaw as I go through and show you that many people make the same argument. Say, for example, sorry, but Steam players are a tiny fraction of the overall population, which uses Star Trek's own launcher. 3K players is not representative of the actual number, right? Okay, there's one of those arguments, and then I had a more recent one where a guy said that there's a bajillion players still playing. Sorry, let me go find this one. Actually, did I save that one? I think I saved that one. Okay, so here's the comment right here. he says, MMOpopulation.com lists the game at 112k players daily. Was it? Okay, so there's an MMOpopulation.com. Scroll down to 19th here, where they say that there is 112,000 daily players and 1.1 million. Okay, so where I wonder where they get these statistics from. You know what I mean? Like, they probably got this from the developer, right? I mean, people keep telling me about this website and these numbers, so I'm assuming these are completely legit. This is based off of our MMO population algorithm and not an exact number. So it's a guess? They postulate that on Reddit, which has less than 500 or 600, is that posts of activity in 30 days? Less than 20,000 subscribers, 500 of which, oh, those are active users. They think that there's 100,000 active players? You're telling me that there is 98,000 players that are playing on the Arc launcher? 98,000 players are playing on the Arc launcher because they just avoided Steam for whatever reason, right? I mean, trying to be nice here, but do you see how silly this seems to me? The thing is that you can only make an argument based on data that you actually have. And so when people are telling me to make an argument based on data I don't have and they don't have, it doesn't really make sense because, again, when we go back to read the particular argument we saw above, or before rather, where he says Steam players are such a tiny fraction. Okay, then provide me one single point of data that proves that Arc is very popular. Show me this hidden massive amount of players in the data around it. Show me that. Not a single person has showed me that. So I bring this up to show you guys the problem with statistics in MMOs. Even the fans of the games themselves don't even understand the statistics. They don't understand that the developers will not release the statistics, and that by judging it off of your perception of players in an instance, like what? You're thinking that the game is thriving when you're looking at it from like a, you know, from basically underground level, whereas I'm trying to look at it from a bird's eye view, looking over and look at the marketplace. And there is no way that these player numbers are anything close to realistic. These are so laughably wrong that I would bet my entire career that they're wrong. There's no way Steam is only going to have 2,000 players concurrent when you have 112,000 daily players. It's such an absurd concept. And frankly, it's insulting because it's made by people who don't understand statistics. They don't understand that I'm the one showing you a graph that exists that shows some player count, and that way I can use it to follow a trend and updates and how the player base changes. That's the argument that I made concerning the Steam charts. I never once said that because the Steam charts look like this, the game is failing or the game is going to fail. That argument was never made. And so this is it shows me that I'm going to have to make a video about this at some point, because people don't understand that, like, when it comes to statistics, if I'm showing you a statistic and you think my statistic isn't valid, You need to show me a statistic that can rival my statistic or prove my statistic wrong. You can't just tell me it's wrong. Like, that's not how an argument works. It has nothing to do with saying that Zarek doesn't know what he's talking about. Sorry, I don't even know really who Zarek is. My point is as I just clearly explained, it's a very silly argument because, as I said, I have no other point of statistic. So if someone can provide me the ARC statistics, which they can't, then maybe I could make an ARC statistical argument, but I can't. So it's like it's a pointless argument that gets made on some of my videos, and it's like, why is it my fault if I can't get the statistics when nobody's releasing them? And not to mention, when people say things like the game has X amount of players. So I'm trying to find this particular guy's post, but I'll look it up. Star Trek players. There's a old update that shows that Star Trek Online. Here we go. So somebody posted this to me as a point of data whenever they said, well, the population on the ARC servers is incredible, trust me. Or the ARC launcher is incredible. See, look at this thing that happened last year. This is a post from last year that says that there's 5.2 total million players. That's tons of players, right? That's an insane amount of players. Or is it? The way statistics work is anytime you ever see a statistic, immediately question what the statistic means. For example, what do total players mean? Does that mean total player created accounts? Does that mean players who beat the tutorial? Does that mean active players? Does that mean concurrent players? Well, I think we can kind of assume what it means. It means created accounts. Otherwise, there's no way in hell they would release one major content update a year. With 5 million players, like, do you realize how much money they'd be bringing in if they had 5 million active players? Total players and total made account, these are the most misleading statistic in all of MMOs. And it's bizarre that people in 2019 rather, are still making arguments on total player counts when we've been debunking those arguments since I was like 12 playing MMOs online. Because you can clearly see when a company says total players, you don't see that in the game. It doesn't manifest at all in the game in any way, shape, or form. So then you think, okay, when are these players playing? Well, there's no data nor specific requirement for what's considered a player. How many hours is considered a player? Well, I'm going to tell you guys some interesting statistics, again, from one of my Star Trek sources. He tells me that based on his data, he's looked through the achievements, the in-game achievements. And he says that specifically, let me see if I can find the data here. I want to read the exact point. Okay, so basically, the idea is that when you look at the achievement system in the game, the achievement system will show you kind of what percentage of players have accomplished a certain thing. And this guy postulates, I would have to double check this data myself, so take this with a grain of salt. But he says that 5% of players who've played the game based on the achievements completed the tutorial. Now, let me say that again. 5% of the total players completed the tutorial. So if we just do the quick math there, by the way, those numbers sound very realistic. Just based on, you know, my research with other games. So 5.2 million players, sorry, multiply by 0.05. So 260,000 players out of that 5.2 million beat the tutorial. Now, how many of those players are still actively playing? We don't know. Do you see my problem here? And the only way I could know is if they would admit it to me. If they would show me their data and them being Cryptic Studios, then I would know for sure. And then I could do the correct reporting, right? That'd be awesome. But the world doesn't work like that. Not when money's involved, guys. What incentive do they have to tell me their particular statistics? They don't have one. But there are other things besides being told explicitly that you can use to determine how well a game's doing, right? Because if the only metric that you can use is word of mouth directly from the developer, you're not going to make it far in this world. And you're not going to make it far in this particular field because they are not going to admit it to you. I interviewed a dev who kept misdirecting every time I asked him a particular question about development. I'm used to them not wanting to admit this stuff to me. That's why I don't go out of my way to converse with the developers whenever I do make videos on certain games. My point is that just in a quick instance, we can make 5.2 total million players into 260,000 players, which is a much smaller amount of players. Now, if we think about the amount of these players that beat the tutorial like me and then quit right after the tutorial, well, what are those statistics? We have no idea. The tutorial doesn't take that long. So if 95% of your player base is already quitting, or let's say 90 to be fair, if 90% of your player base is already quitting before they even beat the tutorial, that means that you have clear player retention problems. That means that you have clear and apparent issues that people are seeing and identifying and thinking, okay, I don't want to keep playing this game, right? And so that's why, like, statistics in MMOs, it's a complete minefield, because you get reported, first off, all of these secondhand statistics that come from word of mouth of people saying the game's alive and thriving. And remember when I said that there's other metrics that you could use to see how well a game's doing? Watch this. So I come here and I'll go to release notes. I go to 2019 or 2018 and I can look to see how frequent they're doing updates. It's about 6 to 7 updates a month. Now, out of curiosity, what would one of these updates entail? I'm sure probably a lot, right? Resolved an issue about an NPC not rewarding something correctly, an XP total not being tracked correctly, resolving an issue with fleet ground controls. Okay, so what about the next one? What about I'll just open them in quick succession. Okay, the new featured episode. Here's the new zone. Okay, they're showing some type of like a new story zone re-engineering. They introduce. Okay, here's a real update. That's a real update. The beginning of 2018. Nice. Here's another one in. Wait, no, is this still 125? Oh. Huh. So this is when they did their major update, was in January. So let's see if, because they released their season 14.5 in April, right? Okay. They had 2 major updates so far. Victory is Life in June. More reputation, some different captains. See, this is an idea of what you can do to check how well a game's doing. Is just literally go through and read the different updates. And you can postulate on your own what you think is considered an update. Like this is a bug fix, right? This is a couple of bug fixes. This isn't an update. So, you know, don't just look at it and see a bunch of updates and think, wow, there's a lot of updates. Actually, take the time to dive in and look at some of them. Also, you can go to like no, not. There's an upcoming content. There we go. Now this one is probably a little bit more telling, because you can look at previous updates and that will kind of mislead you, because maybe the game was doing better at that time. Whereas you can look at kind of like upcoming content for certain games and see what they have officially announced for upcoming content. Now, right now, according to upcoming content, whenever this is on Star Trek Online's Gamepedia, right? I didn't invent this. I didn't edit any of this. I scroll down, upcoming content. Okay, content. So far, April, they're saying there's going to be a new task force operation, which is apparently some event. They're getting rid of the Foundry system, which, by the way, unfortunately, I didn't get to mention in my video. The Foundry system was a quest creating system. And then they're going to do the part 3 of their Age of Discovery, which, by the way, has been releasing like one part every 6 months or something like that. So what I'm trying to communicate here is that if this is what my MMO is promising me for the next year, for the forecast of the next year, I'm very, very scared. I'm very scared. If I'm a Star Trek Online player, and this is what I look at for the upcoming content, I'm very afraid. I'm very afraid because this, I'm sorry, does not constitute 100,000 active players or whatever people are saying. Like, this does not constitute a live and thriving game. This does not constitute a game that's not, you know, dying anytime soon. So there's more than just knowing the number itself, because again, as we established, you're not going to know the number itself. You're going to have to put the time in to try and find something close to the number, which in my case was the Star Trek Steam charts, the Star Trek Online Steam charts. That's a good point, Radigan Original. That's another thing is that when we talk about player created accounts, as you know, I'm a personal offender of this, but whenever it comes to creating accounts, when I've played MMOs that I'm really into, I easily have 2 or 3 accounts. Easily. Even if they're sub-based, I'll have 2 or 3 accounts running. No problem. No problem. Because I like having ults and I like having characters to craft with and characters to trade with and whatever else. Especially if I'm playing PvP games. I need a couple of extra characters. Cards here. Blame DST for me not being here on time. It's okay, man. You can't find the console players either. MMOs, especially older ones, will lag out when running Steam and on a mechanical hard drive, so players will avoid Steam like plague. I'm not saying you can find good numbers, but I guarantee Steam numbers are far from the whole picture. No, that's absolutely true, Arendrin. You're right, and I think that maybe in hindsight, a mistake I made in the video is not clearly outlining that these are the statistics that the best that we have. I should do it better. I think I'll start doing that from now on, to just preface my statistics with, this is the best that we have, because it's not an argument to tell somebody, hey, you don't have enough statistical data. That's not an argument. An argument would be, you don't have enough statistical data to form that conclusion that you made. That'd be a statistic. That'd be like an argument you could make. But you can't tell me that I can't make an argument with little data because there isn't more data. Like, because there's not more data released to me, I guess. Like, it's not my fault that I'm doing the best with essentially what I have. Let's see. What are some other points that people made here that I found sort of interesting? Oh yeah, okay. I know my next favorite comment to address. So one thing people made as an argument quite frequently in regards to this video was they said the game is not pay to win. You misrepresented that. You can buy things in the game, no problem. But you can also earn them. I never made an argument that you couldn't earn them. I made an argument that, like with most free-to-play games, when you do earn them, it takes way longer. So the incentive is to buy. That's the incentive. The incentive either in a lockbox because you want a particular ship that you can't buy on the market, right? Because there's ships that are only in lockboxes, or whether or not you just want to buy a straight ship. A point that I didn't make that the Star Trek source had sent to me was actually that in regards to ships, they're even more pay to win in regards to their modules. And I think Card made this point to me too when we spoke, but the modules themselves can have like passive abilities or abilities that are unique that can greatly increase the effectiveness of a ship. And so essentially a buyable ship in every way, shape, and form is going to be better than a ship that you can easily earn, right? And that's not necessarily par for the course, or that's more par for the course for most people. The strange thing is that people then think that you can make the argument that it's not pay to win because you can earn it. Except that's a fallacy. Like you can't say that because you can earn it, it wouldn't be pay to win, because by nature of allowing somebody to buy a ship that is objectively better when compared to a ship that you have access to, that's pay to win. You're literally buying power. It doesn't get more like apparent than that. It's interesting because I've gotten such mixed reactions from this. You might think that a lot of the Star Trek fans would all make that argument that, oh, it isn't pay to win. When the funny thing is that many of them made that argument. They even admitted that it was pay to win. Some of the Star Trek fans, and I want to look for some of the comments to show you guys, but some of them even said, I know I'm a whale, but I love Star Trek, and I want other people to play this game. And it's like, there's nothing morally wrong with that. Except if you think about, by supporting that type of business idea and that type of business model that Perfect World Entertainment is very fond of, which is locking the majority of your customization in the form of the ships, at least in this case, behind lockboxes and behind a pay shop, and then constantly pushing out new products, new ships to buy, and new lockboxes, is that while you are supporting the life of your game, you're hurting the market overall. Because overall, that means that more and more, that type of market, that type of business model becomes commonplace. And guess what? It does. Because when people are making an argument that because you can earn something in the game, even though it's buyable, it's still not pay to win. Guys, like, unless we're going to rework the definition or create another definition for this kind of game, by definition, if I can pay money and get a ship that is better than the majority of ships that I can earn otherwise, and for the amount of time that you'll force me to grind for it, it's pay to win. Like, it doesn't get more like obvious than that. Like, if I wield a better credit card, I'm going to get ahead. Now, people will make the argument, yeah, but there's no PvP in Star Trek. So is it really pay to win? What do you pay to winning, right? Well, PvE, right? And not to mention, empirically having a better ship is still pay to win. It's empirically a better ship. Like, we're trying to make it as factual as possible. And so when people say free to play, they mean it's free to play. But free to play as a genre it's gotten so mixed and it's so muddled now that the lines aren't clear anymore. They're not clear in the sand. And you don't know what kind of free to play game you're going to get. Are you going to get Path of Exile? Are you going to get Star Trek Online? Are you going to get Lord of the Rings Online? Like, what type of free to play game are you going to get? Card says, pay to win is simply if you can gain an advantage by paying real money to obtain something that someone cannot obtain within a reasonable span of time without paying. And I completely agree. And so I want to go through and show you guys some of these comments, because you'd be surprised that although some people are obviously going to be very defensive of their game in particular, you'll find that it's interesting that some people aren't so willing. This guy made the argument that I actually underplayed the amount of ship effect whenever they upgraded the tiers, or sorry, the level cap. You had to actually spend even more money. So I didn't actually talk as much about that as I should have. I really want to find this particular comment because I found it to be so honest. Where the guy was basically saying, look, I know that I'm a whale, and that hurts me, but at the same time, I like Star Trek and I want a Star Trek MMO to keep existing. And when he kind of said that and made that point to me, I felt the empathy. I felt empathy there, you know, because I thought about it. It is sad to think that because that's the best thing that your, you know, genre, or rather IP, has had in the marketplace, by nature it looks like the best option. when you're the only Star Trek MMO attempt, or when you're the well, technically not the only attempt, but when you're the only Star Trek MMO and only prominent Star Trek game besides like a couple of the mobile games that are still around or still being launched, you're kind of the best Star Trek game. But unfortunately, that's like being a grown man in 3rd grade. Like, sure, you're gonna win the spelling bee, and sure, you're gonna win all of the other, athletic competitions, like Ring Around the Rosie, and and jump rope. But beating kids at their own game isn't exactly something that you should be proud at. And in this particular case, being the best of worst games is not something that I would ever be proud of. But that's just my personal opinion. Active accounts only matter to subscription-based games like World of Warcraft, as still they make money even if the person isn't using that account. Correct. Reasonable can be subjective, and there is a subjective argument to be had. However, that's why for me, if you simply make it about if I can buy power, it's pay to win. If you keep it that simple, then you don't have to make it any more complicating. Now, if you want to say, yeah, but that's misleading, well, then more terminology needs to be created. Because I'm sorry, but that's not free to play. Hey, Kyle Burley, I appreciate the bit donation. Thank you. It's 52 minutes, by the way, and 52 subs. So each minute we've got a sub. Let me change that. That's good news that we already met our goal today, so I don't have to worry about begging you guys. Kidding. Oh. 52. In my opinion, pay to win is either you can spend real money for any kind of gameplay advantage, but for most people it seems to be if you can pay for things which cannot be obtained but a similar user. Gotcha. Yeah, so that argument has always been strange to me because Rift tried to make that same argument, and I have some Rift players in chat so they can attest to this, but the funny thing is, like, people in Rift made this exact argument, and I showed it in the video that I made, where they said, well, you can't buy the best gear, so it's not pay to win. Right? You can't buy the best gear. You can only buy the raid tier before the best. Except, guess what happened? They stopped releasing new neck pieces. Why? Because then you had to buy the previous one, right? But I thought it's not pay to win. Because it's not the best gear, right? It's not the best tier slot. But exactly, as Limpos says, you could buy the second to best gear. You could buy the one right under the best gear. So where do you draw the line? You see how easy like a developer or a publisher is willing to blur the lines? Why are they willing to blur the lines of what is considered pay to win or fair? Because it gets their pocketbook bigger. Like, of course, like, they're not on your side is what I'm trying to say. So when people say, oh, like, Cryptic knows, like, they keep putting out content, we keep supporting them, like, we got this no, they're milking you. They're making money off of you while selling you an inferior product, and frankly speaking, you're eating it right up. Now, I'm not going to hold it against you if you like Star Trek Online, or if you find the game fun. I urge people, don't blindly support things, because you can like Star Trek Online, you can play Star Trek Online, but don't try and tell me it's not pay to win. Because by the original definition of what people meant when they said pay to win, it's pay to win. And by all other metrics, the game is clearly not a popular game. And I mean popular in relation to the popular games on the market, the top 10, the top 15. And when you think about legacy, what will the legacy of Star Trek Online be? It will be forgotten. And I am willing to see you guys again in 10 years to see if I'm right. I'll see you guys in 10 years when I'm still making videos. And we can revisit Star Trek Online, see if it has an emulator, see if it has 4 emulators that are all populated. Star Wars Galaxies does. Now, I'll also talk about some other things. So there wasn't a whole lot of other arguments. The majority of the arguments that you saw were going to be The Arc launcher is, you know, has a bunch of hidden amount of players or something. And they also made the argument, of course, that it's not pay to win. Those are the primary arguments that I saw. Now, what the biggest argument, of course, is always going to be, but the game is not dead. The game's not dead. Guys, I'm going to show you something. In my Death of a Game videos, you can scroll down and read the open credit crawl that I used to spiel whenever I made my first couple of episodes.
But you've got the wrong guy.
Thank you for the subscription, Steve Memories. I appreciate that.
To know how to fight with my hands.
That's such a good add-in clip, man. It just makes me want to play KOTOR 2 every time I see that damn thing. Why did I click this? Okay, so let's read this. Also, here are my sources. If you people didn't realize this yet, I've been telling y'all this. No one's listening, but I put my sources for where I get the data as much as I possibly can, and the biggest points of, like, the biggest articles that I reference. For example, Perpetual Entertainment, Gama Sutra talks about the free-to-play launch and closed beta. These are all good for having visual aids whenever I'm doing a video, which Tom likes to have visual aids because it helps the interactivity of, like, the viewer. But also, of course, to make sure that I'm not bullshitting you guys with any of the numbers that I throw at you. But anyway, back to this particular point. Death of a Game is a series dedicated to uncovering the mystery surrounding the death of a game or a company. NerdSlayer defines the term death in the context of the show as either literally dead, had a mass exodus of players and never recovered, or expectations, and the company ceased to exist. We follow a timeline of events to uncover the clues concerning why a game or company doesn't do well and attempt to put it all together at the end for a deduction explaining how or why the game failed based on the evidence gathered. Now, the reason why I bring this up is that there is a very often mentioned meme at this point on my channel, and it's typically around the idea of the series is clickbait because dead only means literally dead. Except, guys, whenever I took English, okay, in like 7th grade, I think is, or 6th grade or 7th grade, I think is when we first started learning these concepts. But we learned of the idea of an informal definition. Now, an informal definition let's see if we can find informal definition. No, that's not the article that I had. I had a better article before. Point is when you type in death, you get the dictionary definition, right? This is how the dictionary works. You get the first definition, which talks about the act of something dying or being killed, which, by the way, doesn't mean that it's dead. Because it's not called dead of a game or a game that's dead. It's called death of a game. Just like, I literally got the idea from Death of a Salesman. Like I got the idea from Death of a Salesman. If you guys want to know, it comes from Death of a Salesman. Go look it up. Go look up the book. Go look up the series, or the show, movie rather. It's an old school movie. Death of a Salesman is a postmodernist, like, mega hit that probably is going to be forgotten, unfortunately, because it's it won the Pulitzer Prize, so it's pretty damn good. And it's basically a story, a play originally. They got turned into a movie that talks about where's it gonna see the plot at? I want to see. Basically, it's like this salesman guy who's down on his luck, who's trying to make as many sales as he can. And the world is like almost this like weird dystopian American world where, like, it seems as if everything is like unnatural. This is during like the 40s and 50s where things were starting to get dystopian and like the whole postmodernist shit. So it's an interesting story. This is where I got the name Death of a Game from, because in this story, it's hard to explain. So I'll try and read some of the themes here. Reality and illusion. Death of a Salesman uses flashbacks to present Willie's memory during the reality. The illusion not only suggests the past, but also presents the last pastoral life. Pastoral as in, the genre is a subgroup of pastoral poetry, as the elegy takes the pastoral elements and relates them to expressing grief at a loss. So it's like melancholic, I think would have been a better way to describe that. Willie has dreamed of success his whole life and makes up lies about his and Biff's success. So he basically lies to himself and talks about how successful he is. The more he indulges in the illusion, the harder it is for him to face reality. Biff is the only one who realizes that the whole family lived in the lies and tries to face the truth. And that's... I don't want to spoil the rest of the story because it's a good one. But the point being is that I got it from a literary piece, right? Now, the concept of death is not just literal. It never has been just literal, guys. It hasn't been just literal since the first people, the Sumerians, wrote words down. the first time they wrote this down, right? The first people whoever wrote something down, Sumerians, I believe is it pronounced Sumerians? There he goes. This is the civilization that is the oldest linked civilization for having the written word. Right? This is the oldest civilization. When old civilizations talked about death, how did they talk about it? In mythology. It was not literal. Yes, you can literally die in the real world, but even when they were writing about it back in the, 200 BC or whatever, they were still writing it in a poetic in a poetic fashion. My point is that this has been around for thousands of years now. People have learned that death is not just a literal term and doesn't just mean literal things. So it is a bit appealing that when people see the name death, they don't understand that it's been personified since the beginning of time. We created a god named Hades, okay? He was the god of the underworld. The river Styx, right? Like, the river Styx, right? What was the river of Styx? It was essentially this realm, this body of water, this river that held all of the souls of those who couldn't pay the toll to pass into heaven, or in this case, to not go to the underworld, right? To not go to the hell. And so, sorry, it's just absurd when people can't still understand this concept in 2019, that we're not just talking about literal definitions. So do I lie to myself? You're taking too much from that one, then pause. To be honest, if you have to use the dictionary definition, then perhaps the title is a bit unclear. Well, first off, nobody in the world has to use any definition. That's another absurd argument someone made to me, was that you need to use my definition of death. It's like, no, I don't, because there's a couple different definitions of it. For example, if we look up the informal definition, which is said in the literal dictionary, like, let's go to Webster. Okay, so here are all the definitions of death. Permanent cessation of all vitals, the end of life. That's the first definition. Followed by an instance of dying, meaning that you're not literally dead yet, right? That's how I use it in the series. That's why I talk about a mass exodus of players or a game never recovering its population. The cause or occasion of loss of life, or a cause of ruin, right? A failure is considered a death, right? This is in the dictionary. I'm not making this shit up. I didn't edit this or anything. I'm just reading what's in the dictionary. Capitalized. Folklore. The destroyer of life represented usually as a skeleton with a scythe, aka personified. Or the state of no longer being alive and the state of being dead. Kind of like the same shit as it was saying earlier, which is another one that I use in the series as a definition. The passing or destruction of something inanimate. You see how they mention inanimate? Because a concept that I mention to people is when somebody walks into a bar and there's a couple of people there and that person says, this place is dead. Nobody goes up to that person and says, hey, it's not dead. What do you mean it's not dead? Well, it's an inanimate object. It's not technically living. No one would ever make that argument, right? Because it's too silly. would they ever make the argument, well, actually, there's 3 people here. It's not dead. There's 3 people here. Guys, there's 3 people in this bar. How is it not dead? Or how is it dead? It's still alive. Except, again, people can use that context to state that they mean dead as in it's not happening. It's not exciting. It's not popping, right? If I had to use some slang terms. My point is that even when you use dictionary definitions, the argument that my series is, you know, clickbait just falls on its head because it's the name of a fucking series. And by the way, I saw your damn donation card. Thanks for the 100 bits, Onbu. I appreciate that. And thank you, Card, for the 500 bits. A small gift to make a 1 hour long video explaining the title of the series of Death of a Game. You know what? That's going to happen at some point. I don't know if it's going to be an hour long. But maybe it'll be done whenever we do our first stretch goal for the Patreon, which is going to have a new series introduced. I also wanted to do a behind the Death of a Game series, behind the scenes Death of a Game, because I think once people kind of have a better idea, I don't know where this quote comes from, so maybe you guys can help me out here, but there's a famous quote where the guy says, like, sometimes you have to tell everybody how to make it in order for them to understand how great it is. And sorry, but I think that's, frankly speaking, something that people underlook, because they look at the video. And the final point I'll make about the Star Trek video, and then we can go somewhere else. And by the way, I'm only talking about this as much as I am this time because we didn't have a whole lot of other topics that I was really interested in discussing. So I don't normally want to go into the post-Death of a Games this much, but it's okay. It's okay in that respect. Damn it, what was I saying before that? You guys are going to bear witness to my horrible sense of memory. Death of a Game wasn't just killed, it was murdered, and that one's never gonna get old. I'm just kidding. It gets really old. Does anyone who actually watches nerdSlayer regular? No, I don't think they do. That's a good argument, BearNotGrylls. That's a good argument. I don't think anyone who like regularly watches it really cares all that much about it. Yeah, so I think I said that was pretty much it, right? Or did I have one more point that I was gonna make? I can't really remember. Man, it's starting to get hot in here. Now that it's heating up here where I'm at, it's the temperature is starting to definitely. All right, so finally we can talk about some current news. And I didn't have a whole lot to talk about in this regard, which is why I went in a little bit more so. And that's the news that Halo the Master Chief Collection for PC might be announced next week, aka, in this case, tomorrow. Tomorrow on the 12th. The exact time, I believe it says, whenever you play this little teaser, it says at the end. It's at 5 p.m. Eastern, so that's 4 p.m. night my time, which is in for you Europeans 4 hours from now. 4 hours from now, tomorrow. So this is pretty big news. Now, I'm really excited about this because I've been wishing that the Halo franchise would return to PC for a long time. And a little bit of backstory into my history with Halo. While I was playing MMOs on the PC religiously, I was playing Halo religiously on the console. And Halo really was the first shooter that I ever truly wanted to be good at. And now, a little bit of story time for you guys. This is a bit of the origin of nerdSlayer, and I think maybe a couple of my OG guys might have heard this story before, but I'm not sure. It's been such a long time. The Halo 1 came out in... 99? 2001. Halo 1 Combat Evolved came out in 2001. This, in my opinion, consensus has to be one of the best shooter single-player games of all time. It wasn't the biggest PC, or sorry, it wasn't the biggest multiplayer hit, though. it wasn't a big multiplayer hit until Combat Evolved came out, which was more so the PC version that came out, that I think had an increase in it added a lobby-based multiplayer. So that was actually big on PC, but it was of course huge on Xbox because Microsoft paid for it to be exclusive to only Microsoft, to only Xbox. But people forget that Halo 1 was a big PC title as well. It was modded all the time. I played it and I modded it as well. And yeah, it had a pretty loyal, not a huge, but a pretty loyal audience on the PC. Now, that kind of all changed when Halo 2 came out. When Halo 2 came out, it blew up the Halo franchise to the stakes that at that point we hadn't seen before. And it was big on Xbox. It was dominating Xbox Live. But then they released it on the PC. And the downside is they released it with Vista. Yes, Halo 2 was released on Windows Live. Vista Windows Live. What did they used to call it? It was like games for Windows or games for Vista or something. They had some old thing they used to call it. Basically, if you don't know about that, it was this horrible attempt at Microsoft doing PC versions of their Xbox games. Halo 2 was basically a port. Games for Windows Live. Thank you, Ardbug. It was a horrible attempt at an online title, and it never took off. Halo 2 Online never took off, and so because of that, Microsoft and Bungie and then 343 essentially took a step back from the PC audience. They didn't think that the PC audience cared. And so Halo 3 came out. Halo 3 was the consensus most popular Halo title of all time. Then Reach came out, which was kind of like a departure from Halo 3. Bungie left over or gave up the reins. 343 took over. And then once 343 took over, Halo 4 came out. Halo 4 completely changed everything because it centered the game around power drop-ups that dropped from the sky and power-ups. Halo 5 kind of kept that trend. Now, if you're wondering why I'm mentioning the chronology here, it's because Master Chief Collection came out before Halo 5, right after Halo 4, and was kind of supposed to be the classic return for Halo fans. You could play Halo 1, you could play Halo 2, Halo 2 Remastered, Halo 3. It was supposed to be a Halo 3 remaster that never came to fruition. And there was supposed to be a Reach that never came to fruition. But the point being, at PC, Halo 1 was the last time we had a good PC title for the Halo franchise. Halo Wars sure came out on PC. A little bit better, right? Reception than Halo 2. Certainly not as bad as Halo 2. But we hadn't seen one until Microsoft tried Halo 5 Guardians with the Forge, and obviously people didn't like that because they don't like Halo 5. And so the Halo franchise, on first glance, looked like it wasn't popping in the PC market. But in reality, it did pop at first. It's just that Microsoft kept mishandling it, and Bungie kept mishandling it. So it's not that it couldn't work, it's that it just didn't because of the ways that they implemented. We're kind of destined to fail in the first place. So I bring this up to state that the PC audience for some time has been wanting a Halo title. And me being an old console player, I've wanted a PC Halo title. Because, I mean, come on, guys. We played console games back then because it was kind of like the best way to do it, right? Nowadays, we have the tech. People have the access. Why not put a Halo title on the PC? Well, Halo 6 was already announced for for the PC. The lead studio guy at 343/Microsoft stated that the Halo 6 was coming to PC. So this got people kind of excited, though, you know, people weren't really sure yet because they said that, but are they actually going to do something about it? Well, when the news came out that, well, it's based on a pretty reliable source that maybe there's a Master Chief Collection coming to PC. Pulling up this other link.
Chief Collection for the PC, and I'm hearing that that is getting close to release. Now, whether or not they do release it or do announce it is going to be a little bit...
So, Brad Sams, if you don't know who this guy is, apparently he's a guy who's been pretty good at leaking shit in the past. And people in the comments, being the detectives that they are, of course, which I love to see detective work being done. le tip. But people have made some kind of discoveries in regards to this. They say to align this with some of the stuff happening next 2 months. Inside Xbox, which is the thing I mentioned that's happening tomorrow, and then on the 15th, there's supposed to be an MCC announcement at South by Southwest, which, by the way, is here in Austin, where I live. GDC March 20th, there's a Windows 10 update. It's circumstantial, but when you combine this so the way evidence works, right, is when you solve a mystery, sometimes you can solve a mystery with no evidence. And that sounds strange. How could you do that? How could you make a claim and end up being right when you have no evidence? If you're really good, first off, at solving crimes, right? The best crime solvers who've seen the same situations over and over again kind of can see the writing on the wall in certain regards. That being said, the way you solve a crime is based on solving it with the best evidence that you have. So it's not like, I'm going to show up to Cryptic Studios and get my population data, right? Because you're not going to be able to get it. But you're going to say, okay, what's the best data that I have in regards to this? So people are saying, well, you have this guy, Brad Sams, who's leaked some stuff and been right about. He's the one that said Halo was going to be called, Halo 6 was going to be called Halo Infinity. Meaning it was infinite, so he wasn't completely off, right? So people think he's kind of reputable. They also outline these different events, which also coincidentally match up from the timeline that this guy's talking about. So the rumor basically is that MCC is already playable on the PC. It's just a matter of they have to announce it, and either they'll immediately release it or they're going to announce it at a later date. And this matches up the timeline of the release for the next Halo game, because the next Halo game is a ways off, but this would allow Microsoft to potentially sell another MCC game or a Halo game on PC, get the PC audience invested, get them interested, maybe even make it free to play. Get the game, or get people interested in it just because of Halo. Get people loving Halo again. Get Halo played again. Then boom, launch a really good Halo 6 game. I mean, they're setting up for the shot, right? Like, if this is the alley-oop, all Microsoft has to do is just dunk it in there at this point. Like, this is a slam dunk. You bring MCC to PC, the PC audience gets all of the Halo experiences. It just, like Lion says, it just makes sense. Why not do that? Why not show the audience, here are all of our best Halo games. Why don't you check them out and try them on the PC, see how you like them, and then boom, launch the next Halo game on the PC. Because the audience is ready for it. You think it's going to be part of Game Pass, Full of Dark? MCC was definitely broken at launch. That's something that I didn't mention. That's very important to the story, is that MCC was broken at launch. I played it, unfortunately, a lot. It was broken in certain ways, but it wasn't completely, like, horrible. I played it and I enjoyed it, but I saw everybody's problems with it. And they recently fixed a lot of those issues, and I'm talking recently as in the last 6 months. They've solved many of the issues. So it looked like they're positioning, after solving those issues on the Xbox, to go for another PC launch, or go for another launch, right? Man, I'm excited if you can't tell, but I forgot to tell you guys the rest of my story about how the Halo franchise, how I'm involved in the Halo franchise. Because you're like, wait, you're the MMO guy. Why do you care so much about Halo? Okay. This is a soapbox time. This is a soapbox time. Okay, so Halo 1 comes out, and I am, man, how old am I? I'm 7 years old, and I'm playing Halo 1. Yeah, my dad was pretty awesome. He let me play rated mature games even when I was a young kid. And Halo 1 is just this incredible single player experience to me. I want to beat it on the hard difficulties. I'm just, like, completely enthralled in this game. This is, like, it's such a cool, I can't even, like, tell you guys how cool it was to play Halo as a young 7-year-old kid. Like, I was not a rich kid. I, in fact, was a very poor kid. But my dad worked really hard. He worked 3 jobs, and he told me, and he promised me that he'd get me an Xbox. And he did. He told me it hurt him a lot later on, like when I got older. He told me that it did hurt, but he got me an Xbox. I got Halo, and I had the chance, even though this poor kid in Houston who didn't like where he was living, whose parents were just on the brink of divorcing, right? Not exactly in my best mental state as a young kid. but I play Halo for the first time, and it just made sense to me. Like, video games made sense. It was just like, this makes sense. I'm in this other world, and the AI is so damn good in Halo 1. And the funny thing is you play Halo 1 and the AI is still damn good, even in 2019. Anyway, I never played the multiplayer because there wasn't really an online portion on the Xbox, right? It was just on the PC version. So I go to one of my friend's houses, and he was a friend of a long time. And remember, I'm 7 or 8 years at this point, maybe 9 years by this point. And one of his friends decides to play with us, and he's an older guy, so he's like his brother's friend. He's like the older friend, you know? And he's playing Halo. And so we're playing, and we're like, oh, we only have 3 people. And he goes, oh, it's okay. You guys can 2 versus 1 me. And I was like, huh? And so, of course, he beats us 2 versus 1, us young kids, and we get shit on. Now, my friend laughs and, you know, whatever, and then we go on. He goes on with his life. For some reason, that didn't sit right with my young self. My young self was like, man, this guy just beat both of us. Like, how you can be that good at a game that you could beat 2 people in like a 1 versus 2 scenario? And he was talking trash the whole time, by the way, because again, he was the older kid. He was like a goth, like, metalhead, so he was like a big dude, and he was really, like, you know, arrogant about it. And so that also, the fact that he was disrespectful about it triggered something in my mind where I was like, you know what? I want to get that guy. So I went home and I just practiced all of the guns in the single player. Because remember, I don't have anyone to play with. I plugged in another controller and just practiced shooting the other player, which was me. I'm playing against myself, basically. Just so I could practice with the game. And then I'd play a crap ton with my friend who was kind of the same skill level as me. And what I noticed is I started to outpace him greatly and greatly and greatly and greatly. To the point where we play again. And this time, I play against him 1 versus 1. I tell him, no, we can 1v1. And I'm like, again, I'm like a young kid. I'm like, we can 1 versus 1. And so I 1 versus 1 as my 7-8-year-old self now, after I was in the hyperbolic chamber training up in Halo. And this guy's not training at all because he's going on with his life, right? But I don't know this. I don't think this. I just think, oh, he's just great. And that's just, you know, I didn't understand any of that stuff as a kid. So I'm all practicing in there, you know, shadow boxing, and he's just, you know, chilling, sitting down. And so he comes over and we play, and I completely, utterly destroy him to the point to where he literally starts like bullying me. Like, he's like, oh, like, you're just a little kid who plays too much games, and like trying to, like, you know, make me feel like a bad kid or whatever else. But all the while, I'm just internally smiling like ear to ear, because I'm just like, you know what? That was the first time I ever felt like I had power in my life. And I know that sounds crazy to say to people, but I was not a confident kid. I was not very sure of myself. I grew up in a completely Hispanic neighborhood. I'm Hispanic, and yet I look white. So I had to deal with a lot of that stuff. And I had a lot of different things that I had to deal with. And I wasn't confident, and I didn't believe in myself. But that was the first time ever in a video game, guys. It's just a video game, right? It's just a game. Guys, these aren't just games to me. And they're not just games to you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here watching me on this Monday afternoon. It's not just a game, right? And so that was the first time that I truly understood that you can take control of your life. You can get better at something. You're not just like, you know, stuck a certain way. You don't suck the rest of your life. And of course, you know, then I went to play Halo 2, which I played completely religiously at LANs with my friends. And so we would always show up and put our names in the hat and pick out random, you know, people and make teams and do tournament brackets and bring our TVs and Xboxes over and have LAN parties. We couldn't afford Xbox Live. I didn't have a credit card or something, so we didn't play Xbox Live. We just played LAN. But I played all the time. I'm telling you, when I was, you know, at this point, 12 years old, 11 years old, my parents were divorced at that point. I was living with my mother. She was an absentee parent. So I basically didn't have a whole lot of like supervision. So I would just go and play for an insane amount of hours. Even on maps by myself, I would just load in and I'd play by myself. Just because I wanted to play. I just wanted to get better, right? I'd play for 10 hours, 15 hours straight without seeing the sunlight, and then walk outside and be like, by the sunlight, as a young kid and stuff. And I got really good at Halo 2 as well. And I remember playing with my friends. They hated playing with me because they were like, oh, whoever has Nerd on their team, you know, they're gonna be the team that wins. And by then I wasn't Nerd. I was like Obliterator. I spelled like obliterator wrong as a kid, and I thought I was cool. Or my other name was I Revan, but like the bar Revan bar. And the cool thing I love about the Halo 2 story for me was that I had never played online. And whenever my friend bought me an Xbox Live thing, like a little, you know, cheap, like we used to use those trials or whatever, where it came with a game sometimes, like 7 to 10 days, and we just play, create new accounts. And I remember just immediately going online and having so much fun and playing with all these random people that I didn't know, and trash talking, and you had proximity chat, so people are killing you, they're teabagging you, and back then it was fun. We didn't rage and quit the game. We didn't team kill our teammates. We didn't intentionally try and lose like MOBA players do these days. Back then it was just like you were on the same team and you just wanted to shit talk the enemy team because they were your enemy team. And that was just kind of like the fun Halo experience. And that's kind of Halo's impact on me in my life. Is it's been probably my favorite shooter and one of my favorite games. By the way, somebody in chat said you want to 1v1 me. Absolutely, I'll destroy any of you in chat if you guys want to 1v1. Whenever MCC comes out, I'll play against you guys. I'm warning y'all. I ain't just talking trash. I was pretty good. I thought about trying some more El Dorito, but it's hard because there's not as many players right now because people know MCC is coming. So the player count is super low. Not to mention, it's got all of that illegal shit surrounded. So I can't stream it. I can't make videos about it. I can't even be like, I don't even know if I can even be caught talking about it, really. Like the way that Microsoft is acting with that whole DMCAing of every like video that shows Halo Online, I just stayed away from that. But I did manage to play it a couple of times. I met one of my lifelong friends while playing Halo Reach. SWAT, man, that's crazy. It's just, you know, it cracks me up when people say it's just a game, you know? It's just a game. It's just a game. It's not just a game. And let's talk about MMOs now. Now, I have about 30 minutes left, so I'll rant for a little bit longer, and then I'll do the call-in segment. There's not a whole lot of news to get to in the realm of the MMOs on the go segment that we normally do. Black Desert Online has trial characters, which means that you're going to be able to test out the PvP more easily available and not have to worry about grinding and whatever else. That's, like, I guess kind of good, but the combat itself isn't really rewarding enough for me to be like, oh, that's my opportunity to jump in. But if you've ever been looking for a chance to try PvP in Black Desert Online, that might be one of the chances to try it. Also, there's Lord of the Rings Online had 60 hours of downtime recently. They came up finally on the 9th. They were down for basically like, well, they were down for 60 hours exactly, but I think it was over 60 hours, actually, 70 something in particular. They had a lot of downtime. Apparently, they changed their servers. People are suggesting that maybe that means that Lord of the Rings is in trouble in some kind of way. Those are just rumors and speculation, but they did have a lot of downtime, and they got railed over that. So that was some recent news in the realm of MMOs. Also, Anarchy Online released a progression server, and guess what the common criticism on the progression server was? The last conversation we had about progression server versus progression versus classic. What is progression versus classic? This is the difference between progression versus classic. You guys ready? You have scaling armor that ruins any and all progression and 20 years of content almost added into the game, and none of it locked up besides expansions. Pretty much they launched the server, flipped the starting zone, and disabled the expansions for now, charging the highest subscription fees in the industry, even more than WoW in the UK. Welcome to progression servers, guys, where they don't care about the balance, the classic experience, and it's basically just a money grab, and you keep falling for it. I'm sorry, at this point, we can only blame ourselves if we keep falling for this shit. How can you have a classic Anarchy online experience if you have scaling armor? Like, could you imagine going back to play Galaxies or going back to play EverQuest with scaling armor and thinking that it's a classic experience? That's a sham. Anything else? Ooh, we'll go into a couple of these topic points before I do our call-in segment. I found this to be a very interesting thing. So somebody postulates on the forum, or sorry, I always call it the forum. You guys can tell I'm old school. I always call it the forum, damn it. I'm dating myself. Next thing you know, I'll start calling Discord the chat room. Anyway, this guy says, Oreo Love Boss says, I am 100% done with checklist-based gameplay and progression gates, craps. He's done with craps. Done with caps and resets. From dailies to a list of world quests, caps on PvP points, tokens, currencies, etc. I'm a casual player. If I want to go nuts and do 7 dungeons or 7 battlegrounds on Saturday night when my friends are on, I should be able to do it. Is basically the argument that this guy makes. He says that he's tired of people putting in randomly chosen or arbitrarily chosen, amounts of time, amounts of instances that you're allowed. And frankly speaking, I completely agree. I'm completely tired of this shit too. And that's why I'm tired of people getting sold the same shit over and over again, and why you guys hear me be so passionate whenever games end up being so cookie cutter. It's because I don't care if I anger the fans who love those cookie cutter games. Because for me, I'm worried about the market in 20, 30, 40, 50 years. I'm thinking about how it's going to be in the future, right? And sorry, but I don't want it to be all about checklists. I don't want it to be about progression timers and progression, caps and daily dungeon caps and whatever else. Like these are absurd mechanics that existed back then because they were simple and because they worked. But they don't need to keep existing. This kind of gameplay doesn't need to keep existing just because it worked in the past. And a perfect example of this is when you think about the quest system in most games that have these like checklist-based gameplays where it's like, you do your daily quests and 5, kill 5 goats and then do it every day. Like, kill 5 goats every day. That's your daily. It's like, do you think that's content? Or is that busy work? Because that's busy work in my world. Like, I came from working in the office world for 7 years, and I call that busy work. Because that's not really fun to me. Killing 5 goats for whatever reason to do my daily quest allowance, it's not fun to me. Because you have to give me a reason why I'm doing something. And if the only reason is because, well, you got to do your dailies, which is what people used to always say when I would play MMOs and I never did my dailies. The day that I only do dailies in a MMO is the day that I'm just basically like, sorry, but that's not fun to me to play a game as if it's another job. Like, here's my checklist of things to do, and, okay, now I've got... I've already done 3 instances this week. Okay, I need to wait until the next week, and then maybe I'll get a randomly generated piece of gear that I hope I want or need. It's just, this stuff is introduced. These dailies are introduced. The random progression gates and random loot obtaining is all introduced as ways to create a longer metaphorical treadmill, right? They want a bigger gear treadmill. They want a bigger progression treadmill, so they can keep people running and chasing that carrot. And the carrot in this case is just like the little, it's the checklist, right? Like he says, to simplify it, it's the checklist. Everyone keeps chasing that carrot. And I'm not saying that if you like that kind of game or if you find enjoyment in that game, that there's anything wrong with that. I never am judging you guys for liking it. I'm coming to you and telling you that that's not the only way, and it can't be the only way. Otherwise, the future is going to look pretty bleak in the world of MMOs. For example, what if a quest system, instead of having a giant quest menu on someone's head, actually required you to listen and interact with your world? And I don't mean right-click. I don't mean right-click an NPC to get a quest. I mean you have to talk to people. You have to find where to get certain kind of quests. MMOs have done this before. I'm not saying anything that's completely new. But why are MMOs not doing it now, like on the large scale? Because they're relying on the lowest common denominator, which is a checklist-based gameplay. And people keep getting sold the same bill of goods, and they fell for it for like 7, 8, 9 years. The good news is people aren't so okay with it now. You're seeing a lot more pushback. People are tired of the progression that's based around randomness. They're tired of progression that says that I can't do 100 dungeons in a day. Like, who are you to tell me how many dungeons I can do, right? Like, why are you arbitrarily locking me away from having fun? All right, Limp Boss, how isn't it a particularly good system? Because you make like arguments without actually making an argument. So I always have to ask you to make the argument. Thank you, Ginger Spice or Die, for your 100-bit donation. Or was it a little bit more than that? According to this, it was 101, 2, 3, 4, 5. 105 bits. I appreciate that. Gameplay of SWTOR in the MMO footage I saw looks more like a castrated Diablo with superficial social stuff, and I'm not a fan of Diablo. Like the Journal in Morrowind. Exactly, Ramis. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And so that's why it's funny when Limpos says that it's not a good system, when the majority of RPGs started on such a system. They started on a classic system that required you to actually partake in your world in order to know what's going on. All right, sorry. I have some questions that are being sent to me by... is it Zila or Zella? Sorry, I want to pronounce your name correctly. If you can at Card, and I think he will, or I'm sorry, you can either at Card or you can at. Actually, we might need to mod you if we're gonna have you helping with getting questions. Sorry, Zella in chat is going to be helping me with getting some questions and stuff like that. No, I just know. I know what argument, or I know what he's trying to say. Card in regards to Limpos. I know he's trying to make a certain argument, but he doesn't just come out and make the argument. So I always have to ask him, all right, what argument are you trying to make? It's always been, in my opinion, that if a feature doesn't drive community growth, it's probably a bad feature, or at least could be better. And I completely agree, because essentially, people's argument is that because we Band-Aid fixed the gameplay, and Band-Aid fixed the social systems, and Band-Aid fixed the questing, we should leave it that way. Like, no, we shouldn't. We shouldn't leave it that way, because we can make it better, right? Like, there's nothing that says that things can't get better. Like, there's no mentality that rationally makes sense that says that you cannot increase or improve something over time. And the MMO market is going to take some time in order to do that. But there's already been MMOs who've turned this whole trope on their head and then failed because of other reasons. And so I think it's unfair when people suggest that because people try things and they try and innovate and they fail because of it, it's because of the thing that they innovated, when it's nearly never the case. When things fail because they innovated, it's mainly because they fail either in execution or they fail with other things that could be completely unrelated. For example, what if you had a games that oh no, I have a perfect example, a real example. Shadowbane is a PvP focused MMO that was supposed to be Game of Thrones or the Game of Thrones War Thrones Simulator is what they were going to call it. It was supposed to be the PvP game, huge and all these different things, like promising to be, like I said, the Game of Thrones of the MMO world. It was PvP focused first and foremost, and it utterly failed. It failed because of PvP, right? Right? Because of the PvP part? It did. It had a 10th of the budget of EverQuest, right? Which is 100,000 or 200,000, give or take. It was created in somebody's apartment, which tells you about the resources that they had. And it was created on an engine that was like 3 years old by the time they probably launched the game. So it's like, these are so evidently more clearly the issue than the game design surrounding the PvP, right? All right, Limpos says that it's tedious. Essentially, I couldn't play something like Morrowind for particularly long because I got tired of looking for keywords to find out where I actually had to go. I will add that if they actually made a system that would work like the real world where you can actually ask and get proper directions, then I don't mind. When it's just a direction, a description, or something that 20-something in the area, it's honestly bad. So it's funny you mentioned Morrowind in that sense, because it actually, Morrowind is in some ways a good example and in some ways a bad example. And what I mean is that Morrowind has rumor systems and it has NPC interactions. What I mean is that if you go to a city and you ask for work, ask for services, or ask for quests, right, like rumors, you'll actually get a quest. Like, you can find a quest through that way. Like, they won't just give one to you like in, in Skyrim. If you just like walk up to somebody, they'll give you a quest in Skyrim. In Morrowind, you can talk to them about rumors. They'll talk about, oh, this guy down at the farm needs somebody to help him, but they don't give you the quest. So you have to actually go meet the guy and then get the quest. And so, although you're right in the sense that the journal aspect has like kind of a little bit obscure things, which I'm not necessarily sure I would completely agree to do that just like arbitrarily. But my point is that in Morrowind, you actually can converse and talk to NPCs and they can help you find quests. So that's the kind of idea that you would be looking for in an MMO setting, is that don't just let me right click an NPC who just gives me a quest indicator and then it points me with a giant arrow bling into the, sorry, that's not immersive, and it's not needed. It isn't needed. The argument that it's needed just to me just feeds the whole lowest common denominator. You don't need to be that insulting and treat people like they're complete utter idiots and they can't figure out where the blacksmith is when there's a giant, you know, forge right there or something like that. Like, you don't need to like treat me like I'm a complete idiot, but you do need to guide me in some way. So when I talk to somebody, I do want them to be like, hey, maybe you should go talk to the blacksmith because he's been looking for people to do work. I would like to be, like Limpos said, guided in some way, and not just be like told to just, hey, figure it out. To be fair, even these MMOs that we mentioned do actually have quest texts that give you some story as to why you do it, and that story is about as useful and you know, probably has as much effort as the guy that made this post has, which is like a couple minutes of effort. I mean, the quest text or quest story is probably one of the worst things in MMOs. And that's why Star Trek Online, that's why Star Wars Online, that's why these very modular games, Neverwinter, that's why they still exist. Because, like, story is a niche that's, like, horribly underrepresented in the MMO realm. Now, it's almost as if there's a developer who thought of a way to come up with quests to where you could figure them out, and yet they weren't too difficult. I don't know. I think there's a certain game that came up with this. Anyone ever seen this game before or ever heard of this game? RuneScape, for those who don't know, is a game that at this point is like 15 plus years old. And RuneScape is a game that's pretty famous for its questing system. Now you might ask, like, okay, so what's so famous about its questing system? What's famous about old school RuneScape's questing system is that in old school RuneScape, every bit of questing requires you to be out there in the world. For example, when somebody says, hey, I need this resource, or I need you to give me this thing, that thing is out there in the world. You need to go find it. You need to go get it. So every quest requires you to interact with the environment, interact with NPCs, and solve puzzles, different difficulty levels. There's even hidden quests in the game. There's legacy quests in the game. RuneScape has a great quest system that's not entirely complicated. It really isn't. Like, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand some of the questing in this game. But why does it work? In my opinion, it's because it just doesn't treat you like an idiot, first off. And second off, it interacts with the world. Like, the questing is centered around interacting with the world, which is what questing should be about, right? But questing became literally just a checklist where I grant you XP after, but it has no impact in my world, right? Or I don't feel like I'm actually involved. And although RuneScape's not like Star Wars The Old Republic where you can like change the story, right? Necessarily. It's not that level of link. I mean, because think about it, the game came out ages ago. But, I mean, old school RuneScape in particular came out in 06, I think. So it's been around for 13 years. Classic, I think, came out in, was it 99 or 2000? I can't remember when did Classic RuneScape come out? I have to look that. 2001. Yeah, so there you go. 2001. The point is that people will often bring up an argument as in like, well, the market is the way it is and it is the way it is now. But they often forget that there's already other examples in the marketplace of it working and being a really good feature. So like the idea when you're making this MMO is like, let's look at the market and think about what's underrepresented and what can we represent and do it in a unique and fun way, right? That's how MMO development started. What it became after people failed a fuck ton and lost a lot of money was, let's be a little bit safer. Why don't we just go after the biggest general audience we can? Let's not allow for like PvP, you know, in certain areas. Let's you know, pump the brakes on a lot of this stuff. Look, you don't need to go find friends and make a guild. Like, you can do Dungeon Finder, you can do Raid Finder, Battlegrounds, arenas, everything from the doorstep of your city, right? Except, as you can see and possibly imagine, just because they found a way to make everything easier to where it appeals to the more casual audience doesn't mean that it's better. Because if anything, you're seeing the weaknesses of such a model now, where the top 4 or 5 developers or MMOs on the market right now are basically copies of each other. That's the downside of allowing it to all be about what is all the, you know, what's the lowest common denominator? What's the most easiest way to cast the widest net? That's the downsides of it, is now we have 4 or 5 different developer publishers who have all this money, who are doing basically the same games, and we're wondering why we're bored of the market. We're wondering why MMOs are looking less and less sexy. And to provide you a perfect example, there's a very common trope that gets mentioned all the time, and it's, what MMO do I play if I want to play a PvP-focused MMO? This guy asked the question just 3 days ago. He says, I played Black Desert Online, I didn't like it. I want to play something else with some PvP. What MMO? So, you know, that's a need, clearly, right? People are saying they want to play PvP, so what game on the market would they have that's represented in that, right? Warhammer? Wait a minute, that's a private server. EVE Online, the usual, okay. Classic WoW, gotcha. So another old game, okay. This guy says ESO. I can't take you seriously. PlanetSide 2, okay, fair enough. Darkfall Rise of Aegon, we already covered that. Albion Online, we already covered that. There's not, you see, like, it's so sad to think that you're like, hey, what PvP MMOs can we play? And I'm like, I don't know. Nothing. Does that mean that PvP doesn't work? Does that mean that there's no way to make money off of PvP and MMOs? If you think that, you are completely and utterly delusional. It's just that, why isn't there PvP? Why isn't it really represented in the market? Because when it is, it's either microtransactioned out the wazoo because it comes from the Asian market, or it's because it's so casual and so theme park focused that there's no real consequence, there's no real fun, there's no real challenge, and there's no real skilled ceiling at all. There's no skill ceiling, I should say, right? The most common response to somebody when they ask for a PvP MMO is go play a MOBA. Go play a MOBA. You want PvP in an MMO? Go play a MOBA. Go play a MOBA. That'd be me if I was making that argument. Hoping nobody sees my face. Because a MOBA is not the same game at all. It's not even close to the same planet of the same game. And anybody who says go play a MOBA, you just grossly misunderstand what PvP is supposed to mean. Now, if PvP Arena is the only type of PvP that you find fun, go play a MOBA, right? But when people say they like PvP, they don't just mean they like super instance arena PvP. That's a super small subset of the PvP community. It's a tiny subset of the PvP community. The majority of the PvP community likes open world PvP. It always has. It's always been about open world since the very beginning of EverQuest, of WoW, of EVE, of Darkfall, of Ultima, of Shadowbane, Dark Age of Camelot. It's always been about open world. It's just that after WoW sort of killed its own open world PvP, it ushered in the new existence of instance PvP. Except you can't make the argument that that then means that instance PvP took over the market, because it's clearly not as popular. That's the thing is, it's like if you make a statistical comparison, instance PvP isn't as popular in MMOs as open world PvP is. A simple reason: rewards, Limpos. All these questions that you ask can be solved very simply, because in this case, the first person to ask that question asked that way long ago. Years and years ago they asked. Why did they stop playing then? Does that mean that instance PvP is better then because they stopped playing whenever it was introduced? They took out the rewards, right? For one, they took out the reward. They made it to where there's more reward in playing an arena. So people start playing less open world PvP because of that. The introduction of flying mounts makes it to where now it's very easy to avoid PvP as well as just not encounter people. The addition of more ways to port around the world, more increase in instant travel, also remove ability to have a good open world PvP. But most importantly, the more you make your game into a theme park where it's like, you know, everyone's wearing kitty gloves, the less PvP centric it can be, period. Because, I mean, you're literally going against the grain of what PvP is, right? PvP is about conflict. It's about making it about conflict. So what Dark Age of Camelot is this one-of-a-kind game that's, you know, gone down in history and essentially started the blueprint for what every other game has copied since then, which is the 3-faction system, the realm versus realm, the 3 little different maps, and, you know, maybe there's a dungeon that you capture. Like, Dark Age of Camelot came up with that ages ago, and the simple reason was because PvP, easiest way to create never-ending content. Because PvE content, by nature, is finite. We haven't created PvE content dynamically enough to where you can just keep replaying it, right? It changes and it, like, grows on its own. Like, theoretically speaking, once you go through the raids, you've been through the raids, right? But why is PvP different? It's because it's always unique. You can never have the same experience unless you're playing Arena, unless you're playing Battlegrounds. And that's why those things, although fun, and I've been Gladiator, I've been top in different arenas before, I'm no stranger to arena-based gameplay. I played MOBAs plenty. In fact, I played Dota, I played League, I played Dota All-Stars even. I've played these games, but the point being is when you answer somebody's question who's asking for a PvP MMO with just go play a MOBA, it tells me that you just fundamentally don't understand what PvP in an MMO means. Now, once again, If arena PvP is the only thing you're interested in, which again is a super small percentage of the population, then yeah, you can go play a MOBA. But for the rest of us, a MOBA? A MOBA? Can you imagine? Open world PvP, full loot, the ability to have a siege at 3 a.m. where someone's attacking and trying to level my city with cannons? And you think I want to play a MOBA? Think about the EVE players that would laugh at such a statement, to be told to go play a MOBA. You mean we just had this battle with 1,000 people with billions of ISK on the line. People lost thousands of, dollars, and you're telling me to play a MOBA. I'm gonna get that same experience in a MOBA. My heart's going to be pumping because somebody's gonna steal all my shit. No, I'm not gonna get that same experience. They're gonna level my city? Come on. They're not comparable at all, dude. It's disingenuous to act as if they're comparable. Right, but Limpos, you always make the argument that fun is important, except your definition of fun isn't the same definition of mine, and neither is it the same definition of other people's view of fun. But I'm literally telling you, clearly open world PvP is the focus for people. Clearly that means that it would be fun. Otherwise, why would they do it in the first place? So it is fun to us. Sorry if it makes other people sensitive or they get butthurt when they lose their stuff or they get PK'd or whatever else. But that's because PvP. You're supposed to be fighting each other. There's supposed to be conflict. And that's fun for people. That is very fun for people. So much so that people are still playing EVE Online to this day when the game looks like it came from like 99. The game looks worse off than Endless Legend or Endless Space and Sins of a Solar Empire. It looks like older versions of those games, and those are older games. Sorry, Sins of a Solar Empire is an older game. Isn't that a 2007 game? 2008. Sorry, EVE fans, but your gameplay is worse than this gameplay. Because at least in this gameplay, there's way more customization with like actually being able to build shit and stuff. It looks like EVE Online. People are paying us tens of billions of ISK to blow up Citadel stations belonging to competing industrial corps and alliances. I'm now Pirate Life, not too rewarding, and these guys have a lovely policy that fits my playing time. If Arena were all that popular, WoW wouldn't be dead, because the tournaments still run, it still has the same tiny audience that doesn't budge the overall sub numbers of the game. I'm not saying that to diss Arena, I just wish it was better. Top tier MOBAs are a great reference for the balance and design sides though. They have great devs for stuff, and MMORPGs just have no comparable quality balance teams usually. Yeah, I mean, that's because MMOs don't have to just worry about PvP balance. They have to worry about PvE balance, and that the only one that's done that right, in my opinion, was Guild Wars 1. Guild Wars 1 nailed that shit. Because guess what Guild Wars 1 did? They balanced them separately. They said PvP, PvE, and they balanced them separately. That way, the same heal didn't work the same way exactly. The same ability didn't do the same amount of damage exactly. They tweaked a little bit of numbers, but why don't people do that? Because it's harder, right? Who wants to put the work in to balance two different types of games, right? Like PvP and PvE. But Guild Wars 1 did it, and it did it just fine. Excuse me, in EVE, we build everything. You build everything as in craft everything, but can you actually build your own station followed by a mining probe, followed by a research station, and then like do all of that cool stuff that you can do in Sins of a Solar Empire? Or Endless Space is even a better example, because there's way more that you can do in that game. Sure. This has cutscenes and shit. This is how I wish EVE Online was. Like, this is the kind of game that I wish EVE Online was. I just wish it was just a straight RTS, I'll be honest. Like, I feel like that's my biggest argument with it, is that I just wish it was just an RTS. Like, it looks like an RTS. It talks like an RTS. It quacks like an RTS. But it doesn't let you have that same level of control as an RTS. Sorry, I wasn't showing you guys on screen. This is a pretty horrible review. Like, there's barely any cool gameplay there. Here we go. This is how I wish that it played. This is how I wish EVE Online played. If EVE Online played like this, man, it'd be so fucking awesome. That's good. I'm glad that you can build your own mining station, and customs office. Can you actually make it to where it's tied to your alliance as well? I'm assuming so. It is a bit different of a pace, Sam, for sure. What's up, by the way? Like, it's got a different speed, but that's kind of the point. Is like in Eve is pretty damn slow, period. So why not give you more levels of control over your environment? Like the ability to affect like the population, to change production on planets, to research certain things. Like, it's interesting, but there's been many attempts at RTS online games, like MMO versions, like MMO RTSs, but I never really can think of any in particular that were done like very well. But it just, for some reason, EVE Online always reminds me of such a game. It always reminds me of a game of like, it's right there for like being so close to basically being what an RTS could be, which is like, I mean, according to what Card's saying, not that much further from where it is now. Where if it just made a couple little gaps, you could have way more control over things. It might even help the conquest aspect if you could do that kind of shit like that, where you could actually affect the production and stuff like that. But obviously, these games came out way after Eve, so if anything, they probably learned from Eve. All right, I'm going to get to the call-in slash AMA portion / question portion of the podcast. If you have any questions you'd like to ask me, this is a good time to do it. I think I already have a question queued up, so I'll go ahead and get into that. Okay, so BearNotGrylls asks, regarding the news, have you seen the video about Valve's working environment yet? I have not. What? I'm assuming it's probably a specific video, because these ones look like they're old. I know that they recently fired like 6 or 7 VR devs and then tried to tell people that, oh no, we're not abandoning VR. But it looks like people overestimated their return in VR, which I think is a bit interesting. It's always like when you're on the cusp and like the cutting edge of technology, it's so risky. It's just so risky. And the first companies to really put big money into VR, they're taking massive risks. But we need them to take massive risks if we're going to have the kind of VR games that are actually fun and cool games. The next 2 podcasts will be the same. We don't switch to summertime till 31st of March. Makes sense why I didn't have as many viewers to start off. You guys are literally not used to me doing it as early. Ulysses sent me a bit of statistics in regards to the trends with WoW Arena and WoW Classic. This is interesting. Thank you for this. So he looked at the past 12 months alone of the search terms when you're doing like a trend. If you've never done this, by the way, this is always fun to do if you ever have an interest in looking at certain trends. This doesn't exactly, mean everything in itself, but it's fun to look at trends and kind of make arguments based on them. For example, the argument here, I'm assuming, is that WoW Arena is not getting nearly as much engagement as WoW Classic is, obviously. And WoW Classic will only continue to increase, because obviously after it launches and gets closer to the summer of this year, people are going to be hyping it up even more. So I think that this is like when you look for WoW Classic, you don't look for WoW Classic for Arena, is the argument here, right? Like nobody's like, yeah, WoW Classic, Arena. No. Unless you're talking like Gurabashi or like the open arenas. Those are different, right? Because that's how they were in Classic. They were like the open arena. Is it Gurabashi or Gurabashi? I can't remember what the name of that damn arena is. The one where you get flagged when you go there, so you can just like PK people. AKH925, what's up, by the way, asks, have you considered Death of a Game Final Fantasy XI? That was a very popular game, and it fits several of your criteria for death. Final Fantasy XI is one that I've been more hesitant to do a video on. And I think it's because if I were to do a video on Final Fantasy XI, it wouldn't be a death of a game video as much as it would be an ode to its success. Because not every dying game is unsuccessful, right? Final Fantasy XI has existed now for 14, 15 years. It's released content every single year. It has like 20 expansions or something ridiculous. Like, they did everything right with that game from like a developer perspective, like meaning support, customer service, sales, new content. Like, there's so much right about Final Fantasy XI. That's why I don't do a death of a game on it, because I feel like we have some ones that I could talk about first before then. But Final Fantasy XI's video would be much like Asheron's Call to some extent, which is not necessarily a video of it failing, just as much as it's a video of it kind of having its time in the sun, right? So it is a video I will do, but I guess if I'm making any sense, there's a couple, in my opinion, more pressing ones to do. Iramis asks, you talked about your experience with The Elder Scrolls and KOTOR. What other single-player RPGs did you like and feel worth to be replicated again? So I don't want anything to be replicated, but if you mean like inspired by, then obviously I have some very clear examples. That I want Neverwinter Nights 1, in my opinion, is one of my top 4 favorite games, and it's likely, in my opinion, one of the most underrated games. I think Neverwinter Nights 1 is extremely underrated because when you think about what it meant for the time that it came out and how it's still played today and it's still around, it's just Neverwinter Nights 1 to me, it's amazing to look at it and still think how good it is, just from its design perspective, but also like in specific regards as to the amount of tools and ability it gives its players to create story and create content. The argument that I make to people is, why can't we have an MMO that's like Neverwinter Nights 1, where we actually have the ability to create dungeons, we have the ability to create modules, we could even create an expansion, like we can create a new continent, we can create all of this content. Why not give players the ability to create all of that content for you? Then you don't have to worry about developer-made content. And that's the thing about the current market and the current model for the MMO market at the moment. It's very much like generalistic, and that's kind of how it is. Like it doesn't diverge in many ways. The problem with it, as we're already seeing with WoW, the most popular MMO that is in existence right now, we're already seeing some of the writing on the wall, and I talk about this. As soon as WoW does bad in an expansion, like it did with BFA, Battle for Azeroth, it immediately takes a huge hit in revenue. A huge hit. Why? It's a subscription-based game, right? But it also is a game that is number one, first and foremost, front and center, focused on developer-made content. Why is that a bad thing potentially? Well, when it works, it works. You put out an expansion, people buy enough of it to where you can make another expansion. That's what Elder Scrolls Online is doing right now. But what happens if they have a bad expansion? Well, they're in a bad spot. You might be saying, yeah, but that doesn't mean that they're going to fold overnight. Sure, it doesn't. But what if I told you that companies have folded overnight after one bad expansion, after one bad release, right? It happens all the time. And so the idea is that like one bad release, one bad expansion, and all of a sudden you're losing all of the players that you need to afford to make that content, right? It takes more money. It takes time. It takes resources. To give you an example, the best example of this is watch the Age of Empires Online video that I did. The lead producer at Microsoft stated that essentially the main reason why the game failed was because it was too expensive to create the content based on the receptions that they were getting, right? So the problem with developer-made content is that it inevitably becomes, or it gets to a point where they either have to change the business model, right? They can't be sub-based anymore because they don't have enough players, which means they introduce ships, which means they introduce loot boxes, which means they introduce pay-to-win mechanics, which means they introduce quality of life changes, or buy for quality of life, or buy for convenience kind of changes, right? That's why they start to do that, because they need to push out more content. But do you understand the problem with this? The problem here is that the fallacy is essentially you're saying that's the only way to do it, but it's not, and it never was. The initial way to do it was sandbox content because they didn't have enough developer-made content. So accidentally, they created this amazing model that players supported themselves, and they didn't need as much developer interaction. So on accident, they essentially discovered that sandbox games are superior in the single... well, I'm not trying to say they're only good at one thing, but I'm saying sandbox games, in my opinion, de facto are better than theme park games in this one specific realm, and that's player-created content. It always is. You can always create more content in a sandbox game than you can create in a theme park game. That's just a fact. Why is that? Because in a theme park game, the developers, the onus, as I say in my video, is on the developers to make the content. Whereas in a sandbox game, the onus is more so on the players to create the content. And you might say, yeah, but people use that as a way to say, oh, there's so much content, you could do everything, and there's not actually anything to do. Right, but that's just a bad sandbox. It doesn't mean that all sandboxes are like that, because even Star Wars Galaxies and NGE, which is the update that everybody said killed the game, had extreme amounts of sandbox features. Chronicler, you could create quests, you could create missions, you could build houses out of scratch with, move things as little as like pixels, meaning like you had that level of control over your environment. There was player-run governments, different factions, a neutral faction. Like there was so much player-made content in Galaxies. The reason why I always bring it up is because it was the gold standard in that regard. Now you might ask, like, okay, so if you're a developer and in a couple of years you want to make a new MMO, which one is more sexy to you? Maybe I'm biased, but I'm going to say the sandbox one. And it's simply put, it's because it's way more sustainable. It's way more sustainable. If I'm an indie developer, a smaller company, I can't make WoW. I can't make Elder Scrolls Online. I can't make Final Fantasy XIV. I don't have the IP, the world, the publisher, the money to make those generalistic games. I have to make a more specific game. And if you tell me to choose theme park or sandbox, small scale theme park is not really reliable. It just isn't. It's a small scale, an indie theme park doesn't really work because you need way too much content. Way too much content. The best medium is somewhere kind of in between. Like maybe a game that has theme park parts in it, but also allows players to create their content. Because you can't be surprised whenever BFA tanks and WoW's population just drops and their revenue just drops. Well, yeah, because you need them to keep paying the subscription fee to keep making the new content. If you can't make the new content, the game dies. SaturdayNightLifeTV says, ESO PvP looks engaging and has some similarities with Dark Age of Camelot. It doesn't just have similarities, it shares the same co-founder of Mythic, who was also a lead developer on the project. So it doesn't just share similarities. It literally is like the same guy who was involved in the game. What do you think of the PvP specifically in that game? Let's watch some of it. First thing you'll notice when you search PvP is you can judge the health of a PvP scene based on how popular search results are. And this is true for nearly anything. Typing in ESO PvP, and I'm getting things that are like hundreds of views. Now, these are more so recent, so let's go for, how about view count? The most popular videos, of course, are going to be older videos. Here's one from 4 years ago from Angry Joe. Here's one from 2 years ago from Cypher PK, who still makes videos, by the way. Okay, what about 1 year ago? Okay, here's one from 1 year ago. 166,000. All right, so there's some level of popularity. People were watching his guides. He's getting like death of a game numbers on the views. That's good to see. All right, but let's just click on one of these. Here's a dueling tournament. Apparently, some kind of dueling tournament. Now, the first thing you'll notice is that this guy's playing on console, so I don't know if we should look at this. Anyway. Okay, so I'll walk you through how I determine whether or not, just based on looking at a game, if I like the PvP. Which, by the way, I've played this game, so I'm cheating a little bit because I've felt it as well. All right, so the first thing I'll notice is incessant jumping for essentially no reason. It actually even slows his movement, if you watch that. Watch like very slowly. And by the way, guys, I'm a massive nerd, and I'm a massive tryhard. So if you're wondering why I even care about these things, it's because that's how much I like PvP. Right here, when he jumps forward, it allows him to turn around while keeping his forward momentum, which is why people do jumping in MMOs. It allows you to move forward while keeping your forward momentum, but allow you to see behind you. However, when he goes to jump again, he goes to jump again while turning around, which completely stops his forward momentum. Now, you might be asking, how is this relevant in any way? This is a 1v1 dueling tournament. This is a 1v1 dueling tournament. And you're telling me that guy doesn't know about that? I learned that when I was a kid. You learn momentum and movement in a game, like, basically right off the bat. And so when I see like a dueling tournament and I see such like easy mistakes in that sense, it tells me a low skill ceiling, right? Now, to continue watching the video, because I don't make my opinion based off of one detail, right? Now, one thing I notice here is that both characters aren't healers. They have damage abilities, and yet they're able to heal themselves. And so how are they able to heal themselves? Well, because the game doesn't have a Holy Trinity system. That's apparent, right? There's no Holy Trinity here. Like, yes, you can heal in this game, but it's not the typical Holy Trinity. Everybody has the ability to heal as well. It's more so like Guild Wars style. I mean, it's kind of a copy off of Guild Wars, but anyway, you have the ability to heal yourself, which means that everybody can 1v1. Everybody can 1v1 in games like that. When you can heal yourself, everybody can 1v1. I don't like games like that because not every class should be able to 1v1. Not every class should have the ability to self-heal. I don't agree with that mechanic. It doesn't make sense in any context, not even a real life scenario. Like real life, other fantasy games, other fantasy worlds, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, like these other Dune, these other fantasy sci-fi worlds, like they don't have a mechanic where you can just like incessantly heal yourself because it removes so much complexity from the game. And like, for example, when we talk about healing in like Global Agenda, right? I love talking about healing and healing in Global Agenda because healing in Global Agenda was targetable. Now, what you'll notice here is, yes, it's a little bit old because this game's like 13 years old, but he has to look at his targets in order to heal them. That requires a certain amount of tracking aim and twitch aim. And so he has to move around, stay out of the AoEs, right? He's trying to stay out of the AoEs. He's watching his positioning because he can't overextend because he doesn't have a lot of offensive power, right? So it actually is nano machines, funny enough. Nice meme. And so he's making sure that he's close enough and in range with his targets in order to land the heals on them. This to me looks like visceral, exciting gameplay because the entire time the healer is trying to have this careful balance of fighting while also healing at the same time and watching his positioning. you take a lot of that out whenever you have PvP fights that are just 1v1s. So let's find one that's like a team fight. ESO. Lots of 1v1 stuff. Because, I mean, 1v1ers, I guess, are the ones that are going to make videos like that. Here's Cypher PK. He's a consensus considered good player of the game. So let's watch a consensus, you know, received good player, or he's a consensus good player. Or received as a consensus good player, I should say. Sorry. I can tell you why I don't like Elder Scrolls Online PvP. First off, the movement animations. If you notice, he just animation canceled there. Watch this. You see that? By the way, I've put maybe 20, 30 hours into this game, so I'm not a professional PvPer. I don't even know the game's PvP that much. And yet I can tell immediately that he's animation canceling. You see that? How he animation canceled? That's the meta in this game, is animation canceling. So if you're okay with such things, you're okay with animation canceling, you don't mind that as a mechanic, even though it doesn't get fixed and they know it's a problem because they leave it in because PvPers say it's part of the skill ceiling. If that's for you, then okay. I've never been a fan of the games that you have to glitch in order to increase their skill level. And I know there's great examples of this. There's examples like Melee. Super Smash Bros. Melee has a lot of glitches that do increase the skill level, right? So I know there are some exceptions, but in this case, I'm sorry, doing a single animation cancel, which basically means everybody's going to be doing it because it's so essential, doesn't constitute a skill ceiling to me. What else doesn't constitute a skill ceiling to me is that the concept of him aiming is not aiming. He's just literally highlighting his target, right? Watch what I mean here. Let's slow it down. Okay, watch this. Where does this guy come in on him? All right, so watch this here. He rolls to dodge the ability. Invuln frame dodge, which I'm not completely against, but I do think it lessens the skill level 100%. Watch how when he lands this ability. Look at his crosshair. Did you see that? Sorry, it's like kind of shit quality for some reason. But watch his crosshair. It was still red there. Watch this. Watch this. You notice that? I know it's really hard to see because of the quality of the video. I'm not sure why it looks like shit when it's 1080p, but basically his target is completely off target. Completely off target. In no game, in no action game, in no shooter, in no true action-based MMO, could you hit your target if you miss that much? You see that? You don't miss that much and land a hit. That's not considered skilled to me. I'm sorry. Where I come from an old ilk where I grew up playing Halo 2, which is a hit scan game, which means when I aim, I landed. And so it has very forgiving hitboxes, and it has this specifically because it has a soft target combat system because crossplay, consoles, woohoo, easier to code, woohoo, right? That's why the combat doesn't feel as visceral as you think it should feel when it's an Elder Scrolls game. Now, to provide a different example, let's look up not Elder Scrolls Online, Extreme Archery. This is a famous video. Many of you have probably seen it. But now, imagine you've played Skyrim or you've played Elder Scrolls and you're used to games like this, right? Where you need to aim to hit your target. And you're doing these like crazy trick shots, which shoots a physics-based arrow, right? Look at this. A physics-based arrow. That's the level of gameplay that you have here in an Elder Scrolls title. Now, when I watch Elder Scroll Archery online, Let's see if I can get anything resembling
Hey,
that
this
level
is
of
great.
intricacy and ability to aim
Fun each
precisely.
time to try
right?
out
That's what I expect when I play
left, or if you're
such a
focusing
game,
in on
right?
a boss, remember to keep Caltrops and Arrow Barrage activated for extra damage, and then
He just
spam
fired
them
a
with
giant
surprise
AoE.
attack.
Okay,
And then
good time
there's
AoE.
Killer's
I'm not worried
Blade.
about that.
Of using it. Now, obviously, vigors your
Okay.
heals pretty.
Who is this guy, and why does he always do this? I swear I've seen this guy before.
Greetings, Gilliam the
Okay,
Rogue
look how he's getting a target here when he's
here
not even
once
on.
again with an Elder Scrolls Online
Sorry.
Let's Talk segment.
I'm sorry
This
if I
time
seem
we'll be
insulting.
delving
It's just
deeply into
when
the
people
boast,
talk to me
weapon,
about
skill
skill
line for
caps
the
and
Elder
skill
Scrolls
levels,
Online,
and they
and
show
all
me
of its
such a
glory.
blatantly like off-center
So you're going to see some
targeting
games
system.
found
It's just
materials
really
and
hard.
light.
For,
So
it's just really hard for me to take
Beer,
that kind
and you
of
don't
seriously.
necessarily need
And
that.
these are really horrible videos, by the way. But I'm literally just trying to find a video of somebody aiming. Like, why are all of these videos just guides, but they don't show any actual gameplay? Here we go. Does he actually show some gameplay? Or is this how people do their reviews nowadays?
Agent
When they do
combat.
like such
Then
things?
champion points and non-champion points.
Because I don't know. I always
Or-
remember people would like show the montage first and then tell you what the guide was. But I can't even show you guys what my point is because I can't find a video of somebody shooting a damn bow.
The last, but when it says next
Okay.
attack, that could mean any attack. That
Is
could
he gonna
mean our
switch to his bow?
ultimate, Veil of Blades. I leap in.
No, he's not. All right, we're ending that. All right. Any other questions before I leave? Sorry, I don't know if I missed any of you. Miss any of your questions? Right now on Twitch, an ESO PvP streamer has 4K views. That's pretty impressive. That's pretty impressive. That's especially pretty impressive for MMO numbers. Did I miss any other questions? Super Mario World taught you momentum, as did Mega Man. Those are good lessons to learn in those games, that's for damn sure. Especially Mega Man, man. God dang, that game was so frustrating as a kid. I went back and played it like a year ago, and I was like, how the hell did I play this as a kid? Like, I was struggling to beat it now. Yeah, so I never said animation canceling is not okay, by the way. So please don't imply that that's what I said. I have no issues with animation canceling in the right context. My point is that people say that because there's animation canceling in ESO, there's a level of skill. What? No. And second off, using it as a measure of skill, it's not really even that skillful in the first place to do an animation cancel. Some games it's hard, like Melee it's hard, right? Like Darkfall, to learn how to bunny hop is hard. To learn how to tech chase or learn how to wave dash is pretty damn hard. If these Melee terms sound completely foreign to you, Melee has a bunch of bugs that make the game... Wait, that's not Melee. Oh, here we go. Melee has a lot of different mechanics that are essentially... they increase the level of skill, and they're completely bugs. And they were left in the game and never patched out. Here's one called wave dashing, where the guy dodges very quickly into the ground, which allows him to greatly increase the speed in which he can approach his opponent and combo. You see how he immediately comboed into another attack? It's because he's down, he's fast falling into a short hop while also doing a dodge mechanic. This is hard to do. If any of you have ever played Melee, if you can even do that one single time, that takes skill. Severe mechanical skill. And people are going to make the argument to me that ESO's animation canceling is skill? I mean, it's just... It's completely not even the same argument. Animation canceling, yeah, it is in many games. But in other games, it requires a much higher technical ability and skill to fire off or pull off. And that's why they don't just patch it out. In the case of games like ESO, it seems like something so kind of minuscule that, I'm sorry, but it doesn't really seem like it's worth not patching. If everybody's going to do it anyway, and it's not that hard to do, because it isn't, then why not just change it? You see what I'm saying? They don't change wave dashing, excuse me, because if they did, they'd greatly reduce the skill level of the game. greatly reduced. Not just like, oh, now not everyone is going to do it. Well, it would completely change the way the game plays. And so this to me is a good bug, right? That manifested itself into essentially a feature. Now, things like dragging and chivalry. I hate this shit. I hate swing manipulation in games. I'm a huge abuser of it. Just so you guys know, I've played hundreds of hours of this game. Hundreds of hours in the original that was a Valve mod or a source mod, Age of Chivalry. And I abused all of this shit, okay? I'm not perfect in that sense. I abuse the mechanics as well. But these mechanics are universally hated by the casuals and those who ended up quitting the game because of it. So all the super tryhards who play the game to no end, they don't have a problem with it because they can easily exploit hitboxes and kill people when they shouldn't be killing people. So the idea is that because this game is physics-based, you can just like do insane amounts of like dragging where it's just like, if you imagine someone doing this in real life, they'd be like, that's how you'd be like attacking with your sword, which is obviously not how you would have a sword fight. So this is an example of how a mechanic does technically add more skill, but it also so absurd and annoys people to great end that I could argue that you probably want to fix it. And I mean, a game that's trying to beat everything and then some to this game is called Mordhau. And Mordhau fixed this issue itself. They made momentum. As you can see, there's a diminishing return as well as your weapon itself is a point of physics. So whenever it collides with your opponent, it's gonna stop. So if you attack close, you're gonna get like a kind of swing like that versus like a swing that is a full-fledged swing just because it lands like on an inch of your body, which is kind of how it is in these other games. Anyway, I'm digressing, but I'm trying to explain to you guys the theory and how I look for what I consider to be skilled in a game's gameplay. Any other questions, or is that it for today? I think I'll be stopping. Oh, I got another one. I was going to ask Ulysses87 asks, I was going to ask, what's the most fun you had exploring or traveling in any game? Darkfall. It has to be Darkfall. Darkfall, because when you explore in Darkfall, it wasn't just exploring. It was, what if someone attacks me? Like, what if someone sees me and I'm like hiding and I don't want to die and I lose all my shit? Like, exploring in that game was so fun to me because of the danger, right? I'm looking for a particular... Oh, you probably do. But this is a scenario that could happen to you in the game, right? This is super old quality, so sorry about that. But this is a good friend of mine, and he's on a continent called... dang it. Am I really forgetting what they call it off the top of Niflheim. No, not Nibelheim. Niflheim. So Niflheim is the name of this continent. This is an island that you had to travel to. When you travel here, you're essentially going to completely uncharted lands that you don't start at and that is difficult to get. There's no way to instant travel here unless somebody were to like buy a rune for you. And so my friend here in this story, right, is coming to this land without knowing anybody, and he's being attacked by red players. If you look in this, he's actually a blue player himself, killing red players who are deemed evil. Now, the guy behind him was blue, but it's kind of weird because he actually was part of the other guy's guild. Anyway, as you see, he literally just got attacked after killing that guy. Now, imagine this story happens, right? Imagine you're playing Darkfall and you're exploring and you're looking around, and again, sorry for the quality. This video is like 100 billion years old. This video is 9 years old, so it's like this is back when YouTube was not so good at showing MMOs off. But imagine you come to this continent. You're on Niflheim. Damn it. Sorry. One of my friends deleted one of his videos. He did a walkthrough of all of the islands, so I'll just have to Google it to show you guys the picture. Okay. So boom, you arrive and you land by boat and you're on this completely foreign island that's ice, that has different monsters and different locale and different people. And you're adventuring around. By the way, this guy in particular, I feel bad because I used to kill this guy all the time. This goth chick guy. I PK'd this guy so many times. It's only funny because he's a streamer, okay? Anyway, sorry. Sorry, goth chick, man. I gave his stuff back a lot of the time, alright? I wasn't a bad person. Point being, you're in this new land you've never been to. It's this ice land. And all of a sudden, someone attacks you completely out of random. And you're terrified. You don't want to lose your stuff. That's what was fun for me when I explored. The thought of going to an uncharted territory, right? Going to an uncharted land that I'd never had been to before, and some random red guy is like, get off my island, and just decides to attack me. It was like, it unlocked my brain to the idea of like, exploration is fun when there's risk involved. Exploration isn't fun when there's no risk involved, because when there's no risk, you don't feel that. You don't feel that heart pumping when you're playing EVE Online and you're getting chased down. You don't feel that. Oof, I hope I don't get jumped. I hope there's not like an enemy faction or an enemy clan that's waiting to take over this island, or that maybe is just blocking the sea. Or that maybe when I go through the water, I get eaten by a kraken, which by the way does happen. So for me, the thing that I loved about exploration in Darkfall was just simply that there was danger involved. And I always had to be sure. When I looked at you from far away, you didn't immediately know somebody's name. So when you look at an enemy, you didn't know who they were unless you highlighted them. You see how he's highlighting him, and now the person's name pops up, and now he knows how much health they have. So from far away, theoretically speaking, in this engagement, he doesn't know what this person's health is, and he doesn't know if that person is even his teammate necessarily, right? And so it's helpful if maybe they dress up in similar things, maybe he's in his clan so he can see his clan tag or whatever else. But my point being is like, if you see this person from far away, this giant, let's look at like an orc. Or they probably spell it with K's in this one. You look at this massive orc from afar. How do you know he's a good guy? You don't know. You have to take that risk. So when you get close enough to him and you see that he's red, too late. He's going to attack you now. But maybe you wave from him from far away. He seems friendly. So maybe you take a risk. Or maybe you have 3 people with you so you feel a little bit more confident. But maybe he leads his friends to you. That's the thing, is that there's so many emergent bits of gameplay there and utter like possibilities that the added depth of danger for me is what made exploration fun. What kind of thrash metal are you going to sing at the karaoke stream? None. Limpos. Damage history, how to do it right. Because I remember playing so many MMOs where it is basically completely useless, and it's just every singular damage number. Every single tick of damage, be however small, every single minor heal, be it even if you are at full health. Some way to solve that? I mean, games have done mechanics like overhealing mechanics, where like if you overheal somebody a certain amount, you'll give them a shield. You could do that, where it could change to a different value. But then after, it shouldn't give you shouldn't be allowed to heal somebody if you're getting like no value from it. I think I understand what you're saying. You're saying like kind of like useless numbers, like when numbers pop up but they don't actually mean anything. Like it says you healed someone for 500 but you didn't actually heal them for 500. I'm assuming that's what you mean. Oh, and by the way, it's way too late to do a call-in, so sorry, Ulysses, you'll have to wait until next week. I went over today. How to make a story in your chat to get an idea of actually... So you mean like, Are you talking about a system log? Because some games don't even have system logs. But for example, it's hard to see it from this angle. But here there's a system log underneath Darkfall. Most Darkfall players take the system log out of the chat log. That way they can always have it available. In fact, I would wager anyone who PvPs seriously has a system log. And you have it specifically because, like in this case, that's fucking... I hate when shit rescales when you're trying to zoom in. Like, if I wanted you to rescale, I wouldn't have zoomed in. Anyway, here's a better example. Check this out. You damaged yourself and lost 31 points of health. Impact damage. You were damaged by, it tells you by the person, which is kind of like a little trick that you can learn in Darkfall, by the way. See, that way you know who kills you when you're AFK. You lost 3 points of health due to bludgeoning damage. So this is like, again, a very, very important part of Darkfall was you had to know how much damage people were doing, what types of abilities they were using against you, what their playstyles were, at least initially, before everyone did the same shit. And so having a log made sense. I think people don't care about having a combat log as much simply now because it's like, weirdly enough, people are withholding data from us. Like, we've seen this with Anthem. They're withholding statistics from us. They're just making everything percentage based. They're not telling us exactly like the points, because here you can do the math yourself. Like, for example, if I have a level 1 sword and I swing it and hit someone, I know how much damage I do. Now I can get a level 100 sword and swing and hit somebody, and I can do the difference. So I can basically create a mathematical formula that tells me what my difference in skill is. Most games don't allow you to do that because, kind of like Limpulse is stating, it's just some arbitrary amount of number. Like, it's just some arbitrary number. So it's hard to like go back and do the math in that sense. Or they don't allow you to have a log period, which allows you to even see either how you're being healed, how you're being damaged, or how you are doing damage. You think there's a way to make it easier to read? Yeah. I can't remember exactly what game did it really well, but there was a game in particular that did side-scrolling text where it doesn't just pop up on top of you. It pops up and it comes down on the sides. It's in Warhammer. Warhammer. I think it's called, no, is it side? It's scrolling combat text. I wanted to watch a video of it. All right, so watch here. Instead of popping up on his head, which is how it's normally supposed to be, whenever he enables the mod, people are so horrible at naming their videos. All right, this guy has it, he says. Let's see. All right. So whenever he hits his target, I don't know why he has it organized like that. So it's not supposed to scroll that way. Anyway, if you watch on the side, you see how the stuff on the side is going? That's how it's supposed to look. Whenever he hits somebody, you'll see, like, if he loses energy, it'll pop up on the side. Boom, he lost energy. Whenever he got hit by the turret, it told him how much damage he was taking and that it was magical because it was colored purple. It tells him, see, it says right here, he's taking magical damage, he's taking regular damage. My point being is, like, there's another way to do it without just having some giant system log. Like, you can definitely have some sort of scrolling text, which could be color coded. And once people take the time to understand the coloring, they can know that gold in this case means crit, right? And white means a white hit. That's a normal hit. Most people know that in MMOs. If it's blue or orange, it's going to be magical in this case. You know, stuff like that. I think you can do it more intelligent without having to overwhelm your audience with data, but you also don't want to like mislead them and say it's 500% increase, because it's just like, what does that mean? Like, what does a 500% increase mean? Like, what does plus 300% attack damage mean? I don't know what that means. You know what I mean? Like, we want actual data because we want to be able to theory craft and do the math if we want to, but it doesn't mean that we want it that way normally. So like I like the idea of something like this where it's like scrolling and it's trying to be different than just a typical pops up on your head damage numbers. So it can give you a little bit more detail while not being overbearing. And I think this is an early version of the mod because this one's not as detailed as mine was when I played recently. Anyway, I think that makes some level of sense. You probably can also explain it better in text, in voice, so I understand that as well. Anyway, I've ranted a little bit enough. Sorry, so for the guy who asked about Elder Scrolls, if none of those issues are that big of a deal for you, you don't really care about it being pixel perfect aim, you don't really care about it having invuln frames, you don't care that it focuses on animation canceling, you don't care that the animations themselves, because they cancel, make the game look like shit. I'm sorry, but it just does. When everyone's running around, they're just like doing these weird, like, because that's how the animation canceling looks. Your guy goes like that after he does an action. It just looks weird. But if that's okay to you, you don't have any issue with that, and you think the Dark Age of Camelot gameplay loop is fun enough, then it's fine, right? Go play that game. But that's just not what I consider to be an Elder Scrolls game, let alone a game that I would consider to be fun PvP-wise or have a high PvP skill cap. Anyway, I think that's the end of the podcast now. We've reached the end. I want to thank everybody for stopping by today, for those who've been here since the very beginning, for those who are just joining now. We're at 52 subs overall, so I'm good to wear the costume again next week. We're safe. And yeah, so we didn't talk about a whole lot of current gaming news. I didn't find a whole lot of topics I was interested in. We talked a lot about theory. We talked a lot about what I look for when I look at PvP in a game or gameplay in a game, or more specifically the combat. I answered a bunch of other different types of questions. We talked about Halo potentially coming to the PC, the origin story surrounding Halo PC, and then of course my journey with it. And yeah, that's about it. So I'm excited. I hope there's some good news tomorrow concerning Halo, and if there is, and you guys want to play some Halo PC, come join the Discord, and we have a Halo section in the Discord where we're going to set up community games and the whole 9 yards. Once they're coming, we're going to be ready. So if you want to come play some Halo, hopefully soon, then tune in tomorrow or come join the Discord for that. And yeah, so I don't have much else to say you guys today. I want to thank you all for stopping by again. As I said, I'm nerdSlayer, your host. This was episode 25 of the 6 Pixels Under podcast. And see you later.